And I feel like we're starting pathetically close to on time, right? But sorry it's a little late, sorry it's a little crowded. We're really grateful everyone came out. And I just wanted to first thank Howl and Jane Friedman. Oh, that's my son.
Whoever's calling him.
And all the staff at Howl. We really appreciate being hosted here. And I just wanted to say a few words about pathetic literature and just say that I'm so grateful to Eileen for coming up with this book and sort of sharing a pathetic platform with so many of us authors and also with so many humans, right? It just feels very right for this moment. And I'm gonna hand it over to Eileen pretty quickly, but I wanted to read the first poem in the book, which is by Alice Notley. And all my life, since I was 10, I've been waiting to be in this hell here with you. All I've ever wanted, and still do. And now I present to you, Eileen.
Hi, you guys. I thank you all for being here, and it's very funny because I just feel like pathetic is just is sort of a accidental word, but a very meaningful word. But definitely, if it was a word that made you uncomfortable, you wouldn't have come. So I feel like you're all kind of complicit in this construction. So it's just kind of like it's on you now. It's too late. I think that I've had the idea. I mean, for me, this is pretty much what I was doing during the pandemic. You know, I mean, I think, you know, in publishing, there's a whole thing where they're all, you know, like there's a book that you're going to do very soon, and then sometimes when somebody's trying to make more money for you, they just add these other books to the pile, like you'll do them someday. And I feel like it's a little bit like in New York when you see somebody, and then before you leave, you go, "Let's have coffee." And that means I never want to see you again, basically. But this was that book, you know, but suddenly when I was like lying on my ass in Texas during the pandemic, I was like, I'm totally willing to think about what is the most pathetic thing Kafka ever wrote. And then which of my friends indeed fit under this circus tent, and it tended to be all of them, so it's sort of embarrassing. I mean, if you're not in it, that doesn't mean you're not in it. You're probably even more in it. So there's going to be like a slim volume 2, which is too pathetic. So you know who you are. You're in that one. So I'm just going to read a couple of words. Well, here's the question. I can go deeply a little into the concept of pathetic, or I can read my own pathetic. Well, I'll do both. Okay. What's it all about? That's the question. So I wrote the introduction and the afterwards, so I ought to know. So there's I'm going to hop around a little bit in the introduction, and then maybe I'll read my own pathetic contribution, I think. So in general, poems are pathetic. Everybody knows that. And diaries are pathetic. Really, literature is pathetic. Ask anyone who doesn't care about literature. They would totally agree. If they bothered at all. Perhaps the only accomplishment here is I'm saying that as an insider. This book is a kind of hollow. Like all these pieces of the rock, meaning literature, long and short, are just what I like. The invention of pathetic literature surely is Say Shonigan's The Pillow Book. More than 1,000 years ago, she kept her diaries, which were totally Andy Warhol-like, her interminable and adorable lists, her sovereignty to herself. Being discovered, because what happened with her, she was a courtesan, you probably know this, she was a courtesan 1,000 years ago in China, and she kept this list of everything that was going on and everything she liked and didn't like, and she got busted, somebody read it. And she said, being discovered, she admits, kind of ruined things. So in light of our different pace, I'd say we're ready for ruin. And I'm going to read one more teeny part from my incredibly brilliant introduction. Here it goes. Okay, this is very essential. It took about 100 years for pathetic to mean mean. I heard a baby I was like, baby, but like, yes. It went from pathetical to pathetic in the 19th century, and it still meant something touching or pithy, felt. But then pathetic went negative real fast. Whatever brings up feeling in here must get squashed. The word didn't do it by itself, but something closes in on us like a vice, and all unlikely approaches will get slapped down. So what you're stepping into here is a tiny monument for witnessing change, not of any one sort, but many sorts, like a sex club of thought. A bar that serves only time in different and peculiar shaped doses. When I saw how good poor Chista Kakpour was at talking about being sick, what lengths she went to, how many plateaus of suffering she endured, I was delightedly aghast. She could just go and go. It's so bold. It reminded me of what I once heard a male critic, I'll tell you who it was, but maybe not right away. What I once heard a male critic say at a party about a female artist. She's an endless woman. The room got quiet. He had named his fear. Oh. So I just want to say I feel no fear. I feel no fear. So I feel like there is this kind of beautiful, creepy belonging that you're being invited into, and I think it's already happened. So I want to hear some of the pathetic participants now. And the first person, oh my God, it's Rumi, or AKA Charles Atlas. Woo!
Yesterday, I went to him full of dismay, by Rumi. Yesterday, I went to him full of dismay. He sat silently, not asking what was wrong. I looked at him, waiting for him to ask, "How were you yesterday without my luminous face?" My friend instead was looking at the ground, meaning to say, "Be like the ground, humble and wordless." I bowed and kissed the ground, meaning to say, "I am like the ground, drunk and amazed."
Maybe you should consider some of the line of work, Charlie. That was pretty good. What's this like? And now Nayland Blake is going to read Kevin Killian.
Well, I'm not intimidated at all. Thanks for having me here. I'm reading from Bedrooms Have Windows. In winter, up on Corey's fire escape at East End Avenue and 86th Street, I wrapped myself in a bearskin and sat there telling my diary the story of the novel I hoped one day to write. This'll make me famous, I thought. And what was fame, I felt, but an extension of my present being. I was seeing a man who had picked me up hitchhiking when I was in junior high out on Long Island where I grew up. We'd known each other for 6 years. I'd grown a foot taller and my hair had changed color. And I used to wonder, if I grow any taller, will I still be loved? His name was Carter, but I called him Carey. The night we met, I noticed how warm his car was, a piece of toast. I'd sat shivering in it in a black jacket and white buckskin shoes. "Where are you headed?" he said. "Take me to New York," I said. "Show me where it is on the map," Carey said, producing a large road map from his glove compartment and unfolding it like an accordion across the width of the car. His right hand fell unerringly to my lap. The names of the roads on the map blurred before my eyes like sudden tears. "Show me where it is," he said once or twice, all the while playing with my prick. That's how I fell in love. When it came time for me to go to college, I picked one in New York. Actually 3, but that's a different story. In my cheap room, all grays and whites and pinks, he and I met one night so I could tell him it was over. Carey washed his face in the bathroom and came out with water cupped in his hands. He threw the water in my face, meaning to wake me up. "My classes are all very interesting this semester," I said, ignoring him. Sometimes I feel like an ashtray, like you're a cigarette and you put yourself out in me. Ever wish you would pass me by out on the highway? I bet you do, because I caused you grief. I didn't really believe this. But I got to like you, Carey, your candy breath, your mouth stuffed with cotton, your pleasant gray eyes. Oh, baby, don't come. He wasn't about to come. Coming was far from his mind. He stood up and pulled off his pants. What is the trick of description that writers must use? How do I make him more clear, vivid, real, or even imaginary? You know the film actress Rosanna Arquette? He had the sulky, pouting look of a male Rosanna Arquette. But what happens if you don't know her? I could say Pia Zadora, Brigitte Bardot, but at each remove, the similarity fades a bit more, so you don't get my picture. Shall I stick to Rosanna? But then I'll seem obscure, oblique. He had the sulky, pouting look of a male Rosanna Arquette, while I, who knew I could never pull that off, thought it politic to ape the vacuous, slightly zombie-drug stare of 50s singer Johnny Ray. Carey told me so many stories about growing up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, that I came to feel I knew as much about that city as he did. One of the stories was of a little boy who worked a paper route all summer long to earn enough money to buy a suit for the first day of school. The paper he sold published his picture on their front page. So Carey and some other boys pushed this boy in a ditch and laughed at him and pissed all over his neck and throat and chest. Sometimes I felt like that paper boy, that all my love did for him was to give him a big laugh. "You want ice cream, Kevin?" he said. He put his pants back on and zipped up the fly. "I'll go down to the store." "Sometimes I feel like a piece of paper," I said, "that you wrote your name on and then pissed on." "What flavor?" said Carey. "I know your favorite." "I don't want any ice cream," I said. "Why don't you take off your pants and listen to me?" I loved him so much I couldn't let him out of the room. He'd had everything, and I'd only been able to give him just a little. Remember that old woman who lived at the end of the block and you were never allowed to step on her lawn? "I remember," he said gravely, his pants around his knees. "She'd come running out of your house to chase you away if you stopped in her yard, a lawn so shabby and unkempt you never understood why she got into such a dither about it. After you broke her mailbox with your fist, she came calling on your mother in moth-eating black widow's weeds with a calling card and a reticule. I feel like that eccentric old widow woman, that you're the meanest boy on the block. Under my windows I crouch and wait until you've stopped vandalizing my house. Then I straighten up and breathe again. She smelled like mothballs and sour cheese, and her house was unpainted, and one day she was dead. She had turned up the gas to light the stove, and then she fell forward asleep, and while her face burned away. It burnt completely away, like strips of bacon leaving only grease and fat behind. Sometimes I feel like I'd burn in hell with no face if that meant you wouldn't be looking into my eyes with your devil's look. Your mother worried about your bad temper. At night while you slept, she'd watch over you and cry, thinking of you. She wanted your happiness and could see none for you in the future. She couldn't even talk it over with your father because it seemed to her that he'd lost all interest in the family. He, your mother knew, was dicking that little girl in Philadelphia, the one he told her he'd given up. When she touched him, it was like he or she wasn't there, but never both at the same time. Sometimes I feel like your mother, that when I turn to you, you're not there, and that you're somewhere else, and you were never in my bed. Sometimes I feel like your father, and I feel you touching me, and I wish I wasn't in bed with you, and I dream or daydream of someone else. She needed your love so much, but you were embarrassed by her affection, weren't you, Carey? She tried too hard, Carey answered. John Lennon said, "Mother, you needed me, but I didn't need you." Or, I needed you, but you didn't need me. The latter, I think, Carey said. A towel made of expensive material knotted around his waist. I wish I had that towel now. What happened to it? Well, Anita probably has it along with everything else. And I say, Kevin, you're going out of your mind. If you love me, why do you go out tricking with those tricks, not to mention your wife? Oh, Baby, don't come. Prove to me, Carey, I haven't wasted my time. What do you want me to do? He was exasperated with me and my constant demands, and I knew it. Yet I couldn't stop going on and ruining it all. I didn't ruin what counted, but I ruined whatever I could. He got up and went out into the rain to get me my ice cream, but I didn't like ice cream. I don't want you to do anything, I said. He was walking in the rain and probably picking up someone in the bargain as well as the ice cream neither of us wanted. My name is Kevin Killian, I said. I come from Smithtown, Long Island. I'm going to send away for a gun I saw in a magazine. I never did send away for that gun, probably because I didn't have enough money for it. Instead, I wrote more of my novel. In grad school, years later, I decided to write my dissertation on child pornography, but I had yet to connect my decision with my own experience. That night, Carey got into his big, warm car and drove out 50 miles to Smithtown, the town where we'd met. I'd said something to him he couldn't forget. He took his razor and opened a little vein in his cock, trying to expiate for the awful way he'd treated me. The car was warm as a piece of toast. Yet once I'd sat shivering in it in a black jacket and white buckskin shoes. Take me to New York, I said. Show me where it is on the map, Carey said. His right hand touched my cock. The names of the roads on the map blurred before my eyes like a turning kaleidoscope. That's the night I fell in love for the very first time. Now he was somewhere in Manhattan's oily, dark streets, getting drenched to the skin for the sake of my love. A boy passed him on the street. He had no conscience. That's what was so remarkable about him. 2 boys passed him on the street. He was like nothing in the world that I'd been brought up in. A double life was what exactly suited to my consciousness. So I went along with him and got excited. His voice was so much deeper than those of my teenage friends, and when he called my house asking for me, I told my parents that he was one of my teachers. Then I told them he was a writer in New York. They said, "But I thought he was one of your teachers." I never said that, I told them, full of scorn and counting the days until I could get away from them. No, he's a writer from New York. Later on, I made him a piano salesman I had fooled into thinking I had had enough money to buy a piano. Who knows what Mom and Dad made out of my lies? They probably thought I was a drug dealer. After writing hundreds of pages of it, I gave up my dissertation not too long ago. I remember thinking that to lie and to deceive, to lead a secret sexual life, was to me the greatest of all pleasures by far and the most natural. Maybe I could have been a spy for a foreign power, or better, Catholic. In Loveland, only a few colors stain the crystal radiance of the skies. Gray, pink, white, black. Someone holds you for a few minutes, then lets you fall to the rocks. And nothing hurts, and you're never betrayed. All your allegiances are to the holy. All the phones are tapped. If there's someone younger than you in the nightclub, he or she's an enemy agent to whom you must show the marked roadmap and speak the secret words. Once you've made your way there, you never, never grow old. First he frightened me, then he made me come. Then he amused me, then he left me, then he made me recall him. I went to the window, shivering in jockey shorts, holes in the seams in required places, and drew back the cheesecloth curtain. I looked onto windows and chimneys. I saw shabby storefronts and New York rain of pearly white and gray. I looked over my shoulder to Quick Trip on our unmade bed, a sprawl of similarly pearl and gray mattress and stained sheets. Then to the glass again. Once I kissed his face in a mirror. Another time I kissed a glass ashtray. Out on the street, a car was lurking, its motor running. The car seemed sinister, and it hummed danger. The noise was incredible. The walls were thin here. Glossy magazine covers hung from the walls to increase their thickness. Once he said he wished we had no windows since glass was too thin and lets in and out too much heat and noise. I remember arguing with him. I asked him how else, if not for windows, would we be able to see out onto the city's streets. I reminded him that they, the streets, were what provided him with almost all his excitement and inspiration. But I don't need any windows now, he said, since I fell for you. You can imagine how that made me feel. I looked out into the rain and I was glad to be indoors. I began to spit on myself because if he's getting wet out there, I wanted to feel wet too. The night is long. I didn't have much self-protection. I opened my pants and maneuvered my cock and pissed all over my chest and throat and face. Years later, I read a poem by Eileen Myles that exactly answered my need to express what I felt about that time in my life, during which I grew from a little boy into a young man, so that I felt then that I'd never have to write about it myself, only relax and wait, and then someday be wrapped in swaddling clothes. Well, here's the poem from Eileen.
And Kevin gave me $75 for it, which was the first time I got paid for a poem. It's called The Honey Bear, Nayland. My God, thank you. Billie Holiday was on the radio. I was standing in the kitchen smoking my cigarette at this pack I planned to finish tonight, last night of smoking youth. I made a cup of this funny kind of tea I've had hanging around, a little too sweet, an odd mix. My only impulse was to make it sweeter. Ivy Anderson was singing pretty late tonight in my very bright kitchen. I'm standing by the tub feeling a little older, nearly 30, in my very bright kitchen tonight. I'm not a bad-looking woman, I suppose. Oh, it's very quiet in my kitchen tonight. I'm squeezing this plastic honey bear, a noodle of honey dripping into the odd sweet tea. It's pretty late. Honey Bear's cover was loose and somehow honey dripping down the bear's face, catching in the crevices beneath the bear's eyes. Oh, very sad and sweet. I'm standing in my kitchen, oh honey. I'm staring at the honey bear's face. And now, Joe Westmoreland.
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Okay, here we go. This is The Merry Widow and the Rubber Husband, or How I Caught HIV, version 4, fall 1983. That night, it was just going to be Ali, Kat, and me getting high. We were celebrating Kat's recent move from New Orleans to San Francisco to try to break into the music business. She was staying on the back porch / tiny guest room. She'd cut her hair short and bleached it blonde. James and Felipe came home and wanted to join us, so we had to go get more dope before we could get started. The 5 of us piled into Ali's VW and went out and scored. Back home, my little cafe table next to my bed was the best place in our entire apartment to shoot dope. It was cozy and out of the way. In my dresser drawer, I kept candles, a bent spoon, some cotton, and my syringe. Ali, Felipe, James, and I had to share the same needle. Ali used to be able to buy U-100 insulin syringes at the Star Pharmacy in the Castro until they started asking him to show ID proving he was diabetic. Kat brought her own syringe. My syringe had only been used once, so it was still kind of sharp. And besides, we were always sterilizing our needles with rubbing alcohol and ran them through the candle flame to burn off any germs. The main thing we had to be concerned about was accidentally squirting blood back into the glass of water when we were doing the syringe wash. That's when we'd draw water into the syringe after we shot up and we'd squirt it into our mouths. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah. That's when, whoa, and there's a little feedback too. Okay. That's when we draw water into the syringe after we shot up and squirt it into our mouths to be sure to get every last drop. Ali always made a mystical ceremony out of fixing the drug and shooting it up. I just wanted to get high, but we let Ali do it his way. It was our family ritual with him as the high priest. By this time, there were frightening articles about the horrors of AIDS every week in the gay newspapers. The BAR started to run an obituary column. I saw the guy who'd poured beer down my chest in it one week. The article said he was survived by his partner of 7 years and their dog. We were also beginning to hear more rumors of guys committing suicide when they found out they had it. Every time any of us caught the flu, we were sure that the end was near. When I was helping Felipe do his shot, we looked at each other like this was really crazy, like we both knew that this was serious business. We were playing for keeps. But the look didn't last too long, and we didn't stop what we were doing. Felipe said, "Well, I guess we really are blood brothers now. If one of us gets it, then the others will too." Ali said, "You know what? Being blood brothers is a good thing. It's spiritual, like an American Indian tribal ritual." James asked, "What if one of us really does get sick? Would we all get sick?" It seemed unfathomable. We weren't the type of guys that were getting sick. Most of them were older than us. They were the ones that sat in sex club bathtubs all night and had everyone pee on them, or the ones that went to the baths 5 nights a week and lay in their cubicles on their stomach waiting for anyone and everyone to fuck them. After a while, James and Felipe went off to their bedrooms. Ali pulled out another bundle of dope that he'd stashed away, and he, Kat, and I each did a shot. Then we had a 3-way. It started when Kat wanted to show us her extra-large clitoris. It was half the size of my small finger. Ali started sucking on it, then she told me to suck on it, which I did. She told me where to lick to make her feel good, and I followed directions. We all made out, rolling around on the bed while we peeled off each other's clothes. Kat had large breasts, a small waist, and wide hips, an hourglass figure. She loved it when I'd rub her tits, not too rough though. Ali was better at that than I was. He and I both sucked on her nipples at the same time while we felt each other up and intertwined our legs. Ali took my hand and guided a finger inside her. He and I both had our index fingers up in her soft, wet fleshiness at the same time while we were sucking her tits. Ali moved up and put his dick between her tits and humped back and forth. I tried to catch the head of his dick in my mouth as it poked out between her cleavage. I mostly just got a good lick in occasionally. While she was on all fours getting it from behind by Ali, I put on her Merry Widow corset, got off the bed, and psychedelic free danced in front of them. Kat pulled me over and sucked on me. Ali and I watched each other for a while and then leaned over Kat and started kissing while I was getting sucked and he was still inside her. Kat wanted us to fuck her at the same time, me in front and Ali in the back, but both of us kept losing our hard-ons, mostly from the heroin. I was semi to 2/3 erect most of the time, except when Ali fucked me while I was fucking Kat. That felt good. I just wished that he was bigger and she was smaller. The three of us were lying side by side next to each other, jerking each other off, when Ali started shaking and got the chills. We were a little worried about him, but didn't know what to do. I took off the Merry Widow, sat up, and felt his forehead. It was hot, even though he was shivering. Kat said, "I think he might have cotton fever." "What's that?" I asked. Ali said through chattering teeth, "That's when your dope cotton is too dirty and you get an infection." My dick shriveled with that bit of information. Ali said, "I think I'd better go lie down with James since there's more room in his bed." "Wow, you guys, sorry for ruining our fun time." Kat said, "Hey, listen, this is more important. You take care of yourself." I nodded my head in agreement and gave him a loving smile. After he left, Kat started making out with me again. She said she wished that she could fuck me. I said, "You can, kind of." She asked what I meant, and I told her about the rubber husband. It was a dildo that we kept under the towels in the bathroom closet. Anyone in the apartment could use it as long as they cleaned it off afterwards. Kat got all excited and sent me to the bathroom for it. When I brought it back, she'd put her Merry Widow back on and was ready. We lubed it up with some baby oil. I lay on my back, and then she put it part of the way in me. It felt good. I immediately got hard. She started slowly rocking back and forth, saying stuff like, "Do you like that, Joe? Do you like getting fucked by a woman? Do you like me fucking you?" Well, of course I couldn't deny it. It felt great. She rubbed baby oil on my dick and started jerking me off at the same time. She didn't have quite the right stroke for me, so I took over, and soon I was coming all over my stomach. She climbed on top of me and started to rub her crotch on my stomach as she fingered herself. Then she rolled over onto the bed on her stomach with her hands in her crotch and humped for a little while. She started to shake a little, then sighed, then a deep, long moan, another sigh, another shake, and then she collapsed. After a few minutes, we kissed and hugged and started laughing. Kat smiled to herself and said softly, "I finally had a dream come true. I got to fuck a man." Once we'd calmed down, we tiptoed into James' room to see how Ali was. They were both snoring, so we figured he must be okay. In the morning, James and Felipe wanted to know all the details of what exactly happened after they went to bed. They said it must have been good since we'd done Ali in like that. Okay, thank you. That's it.
It's a hard act to follow, Joe. I'm a little flustered. My name's Eliza Douglas. Not a poet, but I'm going to read 3 poems. The first 2 are by Mira Gonzalez. Untitled 8. It's 2:05 in the morning. Your foot on the brake is preventing the car from drifting backward. He is kissing you, first deliberately, then in a lazy or confused way. You know he's trying to communicate something important, and maybe he's wanted you for a long time, but his tongue is moving around your mouth. You begin to wonder if he wants to kiss you or if he wants to push his way through you. You can see his bedroom window from where you're standing. He is climbing over fences and unlocking them from the inside. He says, "Go up those stairs and turn right." You swear that you would have loved him a year ago and every day since. You're waiting on the top of the stairs. You don't know where to look or what to touch. You're thinking about the check engine light in your car. You're aware of certain things while he has sex with you, helicopter noises through an open window, a bottle of blue cough syrup, street signs indicating the direction to an eastbound freeway. He is strong and gentle, and you wish he was only one of those things. He is tracing his finger across the edge of you. Everything is quiet, other than a barely audible sound in the space between his arm and his shoulder. He says, "Why are you sighing so much?" And you say, "That is just how I breathe." He says, "You don't want to be here." The next, also by Mira Gonzalez, is called 5 Years Old. I wake up on a mattress in the living room. I ride a plastic tricycle in circles around the kitchen until my mom wakes up. I eat cereal next to a window. In blue crayon, I draw a picture of a woman walking her dog. I have come to understand certain things, that the slide in my backyard causes splinters, and there are dead crickets in the heating vents. He is embracing me, not a hug, not really. He's kneeling, and I'm standing. We're the same height this way. Over his shoulder, I can see marble stairs. I feel confused or afraid. He gives me a teddy bear. A year later, he will get married. At the wedding, I throw petals down the aisle wearing a handmade beige dress with pink pin tucks around the collar. I leave the teddy bear in a park. I tell my mom I did it on purpose. And the last poem is by Sophie Robinson. It's called Total LOL. Rah, 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 rah. That is how a dog goes. That is how a dog goes boom in the night. That is how a dog slides sideways. That is how a dog lies down in the grass and loafers and dies like the bad dead dog it really is inside. It's orgied guts. And this is how we do it. In, out, this is how we move inside the dog space. This is how we are inside the dog. I am the dog head with my head in the dog. You are the dog end with your end inside the dog. We are a pantomime dog, and this is how we do it. Left, right, that is how we walk, like the sick dogs we are. That is how we fuck ourselves inside out, and our fur turns to mush. This is how we think of something to make us cry on purpose. This is how we be brave and glass over like a sad dog's eyes. This is how we eat our own shit and sing with a mouthful all night long. Rah, 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 rah. This is how we know ourselves, and this is how we hate each other. This is how we sound when we speak each other's language, and how your pussy tastes on a hard day's night. I like to suffer. It's good for us and makes us wet with pride or raw with longing, pulling at the leash. I might die, I might lie down and die. You can dog me in the park and I won't let it lie. I'd screw you 5,000 times and still be happy. In my mummy skin, in my daggy dog skin, in my fox fur mangy woof woof jacket. My skin is my life jacket. My skin has a hole in it. My hole is round and red. My hole is my dog's head. I will die forever in my sick dog head. I will LOL forever in my total ball of meat. I will LOL with my hole wide open. I will LOL all night to the tune of my howl. Oh, I will place you in my snout and sing you all over. I will raw myself up and down inside you, lover, forever.
Johanna Fateman and Sini Anderson, woo!
Hi, everybody.
Just really quick, I'm pretty sure these pages are in order.
Okay, well, you check while I say something.
Okay.
So we're reading a piece called "The Great Punctuation Typography Struggle" by Andrea Dworkin, and it's the afterword to her book "Woman Hating," which is a nonfiction book she wrote that came out in 1974. And Sini will be the voice of Andrea, and I will be Franz Kafka, and
Who else, Joe?
I'm going to be the block quotes, and I'll identify myself. But this is sort of her, she borrows from a few writers in her essay, and this is a condensed version. How are you doing?
I've just been staring at the first page, so
Okay, well, let's just.
I'm going to follow along.
This is a condensed version we came up with, and forgive us, Andrea, for everything.
Everything. Oh my God, for everything.
Okay.
So let's see.
Here, do you want to just?
I bet you never thought you would be reading a poem with me, Joe. Well, I mean, it's not a poem.
It's an afterword.
That's right. That's why you're reading it. This text has been altered in one very serious way. I wanted it to be printed the way that it was written, lowercase letters, no apostrophes, contraction. I like my text to be as empty as possible. Only necessary punctuation is necessary. When one knows one's purposes, one knows what is necessary. My publisher, in his corporate wisdom, filled the pages with garbage. Standard punctuation. He knew his purposes. He knew what was necessary. Our purposes differed. Mine, to achieve clarity. His, to sell books. I begin by presuming that I am free. I begin with nothing, no form, no content, and I ask, what do I want to do and how do I want to do it? I begin by presuming that what I write belongs to me. I begin by presuming that I determine the form I use in all its particulars. I work at my craft in all its particulars. In fact, everything is already determined. In fact, all of the particulars have been determined and are enforced. In fact, where I violate what has already been determined, I will be stopped. In fact, the enforcers will enforce.
Whatever he may seem to us, he is yet a servant of the law. That is, he belongs to the law, and as such is set beyond human judgment. In that case, one dare not believe that the doorkeeper is subordinate to the man. Bound as he is by his service, even at the door of the law, he is incomparably freer than anyone at large in the world. The man is only seeking the law. The doorkeeper is already attached to it. It is the law that has placed him at his post. To doubt his integrity is to doubt the law itself. I don't agree with that point of view, said Kay, shaking his head. For if one accepts it, one must accept as true everything the doorkeeper says. But you yourself have sufficiently proved how impossible it is to do that. No, said the priest, it is not necessary to accept everything as true. One must only well, it is not necessary to accept everything as true. One must only accept it as necessary. A melancholy conclusion, said Kay. It turns lying into universal principle. It's Franz Kafka.
I presume that I am free. I act, the enforcers enforce. I discover that I am not free. Then either I lie, it is necessary to lie, or I struggle. If I do not lie, I must struggle. And if I struggle, I ask, why am I not free? And what can I do to become free? I wrote this book to find out why I am not free and what I can do to become free.
Though the social structure begins by framing the noblest laws and the loftiest ordinances that the great of the earth have devised, in the end it comes to this: breach that lofty law, and they take you to a prison cell and shut your human body off from human warmth. Ultimately, the law is enforced by the unfeeling guard punching his fellow man hard in the belly. It's Judith Malina.
That's where the page is for me.
Without the presumption, yeah.
Okay. Without the presumption of freedom, there is no freedom. I am free. How then do I want to live my life? Do my work, use my body? How then do I want to be in all my particular? Standard forms are imposed in dress, behavior, sexual relation, punctuation. Standard forms are imposed on consciousness and behavior, on knowing and expressing, so that we won't presume freedom, so that freedom will appear in all its particulars impossible and unworkable, so that we will not know what telling the truth is, so that we will not feel compelled to tell it, so that we will not spend our time and our wholly human energy telling necessary lies. Standard forms are sometimes called conventions. Conventions are mightier than armies, police, and prisons. Each citizen becomes the enforcer, the doorkeeper, the instrument of the law, an unfeeling guard, punching his fellow man hard in the belly.
I am an anarchist. I don't sue, I don't get injunctions. I advocate revolution. And when people ask me what can we do that's practical, I say weaken the fabric of the system wherever you can. Make possible the increase of freedom, all kinds. When I write, I try to extend the possibilities of expression. The revisions in typography and punctuation have taken from the voice the difference that distinguishes passion from affection, and me speaking to you from me writing an essay. Julian Beck. Believe the punctuation. This is all caps. Muriel Rukeyser.
There's a great deal at stake here. Many writers fight this battle and most lose it. What is at stake for the writer? Freedom of invention, freedom to tell the truth in all its particulars, freedom to imagine new structures. While this book may meet much resistance, anger, fear, dislike, law, police, courts, at this moment I must write. I've attacked the fundamentals of culture. That's okay. I've attacked male dominance. That's okay. I've attacked every heterosexual notion of relation. That's okay. I've in fact advocated the use of drugs. That's okay. I've in fact advocated fucking animals. That's okay. Here and now, New York City, spring 1974, among a handful of people, publisher and editor included. That's okay. Lowercase letters are not. It does make one wonder. To permit writers to use forms which violate convention just might permit writers to develop forms which would teach people to think differently, not to think about different things, but to think in different ways. That work is not permitted.
If it had been possible to build the Tower of Babel without ascending it, the work would have been permitted. Franz Kafka. The immovable structure is the villain. Whether that structure calls itself a prison or a school or a factory or a family or a government or the world as it is, that structure asks each man what he can do for it, not what it can do for him. And for those who do not do for it, there is the pain of death or imprisonment or social degradation or the loss of animal rights. Judith Molina.
What? It's my turn?
Yeah.
This book is about the immovable sexual structure. In the process of having it published, I've encountered the immovable punctuation, typography, structure. And now I testify, as so many have before me, that the immovable structure aborts freedom, prohibits invention, and does us verifiable harm. It uses our holy human energy to sustain itself. It turns us into enforcers or outlaws. To survive, we must learn to lie. The revolution, as we live it and as we imagine it, means destroying the immovable structure to create a world in which we only use our holy human energy to sustain our holy human lives. To create a world without enforcers, doorkeepers, guards, arbitrary law. To create a world, a community on this planet where instead of lying to survive, we can tell the truth and flourish. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was So good to hear that. That was incredible. So we're going to have a very special moment right now, which is the great Samuel, a.k.a. Chip Delany, is in the book. And he could not come tonight, but he sent us a video. And so he's reading from Times Square Red of the book Times Square Red, Times Square Blue. So we're just going to show a little clip of it right now.
Hello, I'm Chip Delany. Back in 1999, I wrote a book called Times Square Red, Times Square Blue. And for the next 20 years, people have been very generous in discussing the Times Square Blue section of the book. But Eileen Myles, who picked out a section to reprint for the first time, has picked out, and I thought very well, really the theoretical core of the second section, Times Square Red, and I'm going to read the section in two parts. I'm going to read the section she picked out today. The first is section 1.4, and it's all about discourse, which is a word that has lots of resonances for people who are dealing with theory, and resonances that go all the way back to the Shakespearean meaning of the word, so that discourse is a way of understanding, not so much what you say, but a way of understanding a whole situation. Maybe some of you remember that one of Marx's big realizations was that superstructure does not change infrastructure. Infrastructure is what causes superstructure. Section 1.8. So stated, these points appear harmless enough. Over the last decade and a half, however, and I'm talking of the decade between 1999 and 15 years before that, a notion of safety has arisen, a notion that runs from safe sex, once it becomes anything more than making sure your condom your partner uses a condom when you are anally penetrated by a male of unknown HIV status, whether you are male or female, to safe neighborhoods, safe cities, and committed, i.e. safe relationships, a notion that currently functions much the way of the notion of security and conformity did in the 50s. As in the name of safety, society dismantles the various institutions that promote interclass communication, attempts to critique the way such institutions function in part in the past to promote their happier side, are often seen as, at best, nostalgia for an outmoded past, and at worst, a pernicious glorification of everything dangerous, unsafe sex, neighborhoods filled with undesirables, read unsafe characters, promiscuity, an attack on the family and the stable social structure, and dangerous, non-committed, i.e. unsafe relationships. That is, psychologically dangerous relations, though the danger is rarely specified in any other way than to suggest its failure to conform to the ideal bourgeois marriage. Such critiques are imperative, however, if we are ever to establish new institutions that will promote similar ends. Section 2. The linear chain linkage into which the earlier practice of landlord visits with tenants might be said to have degenerated reminds us that the linear chain as an information conduit is a relatively artificial social form. Most social interchanges of information and material occur in various forms of social nets, as opposed to chains. Generally speaking, in a net situation, information comes from several directions and crosses several power boundaries, so that various processes, modulating, revisionary, additive, recursive, and corrective, all of them critical, each of them highlighting different aspects, can compensate for the inevitable reductions that occur along the constitutive chains. Not all nets are, however, the same. Social nets can be more or less complex, of more or less complexity, of greater or lesser density. When the net density is comparatively low, we find ourselves focusing on the contacts between individual net members and often ignore the net-like structure in which the individual contacts occur. When the net density is high, we find ourselves more likely to focus on the overall network. Starting from the above, as the most arbitrary and provisional of observations, I will go on to discuss two modes of net practices and the discourse around them that allow them to be visible as such, that I designate as contact and networking. Like all social practices, they make, generate, create sedimented discourses, even as discourses create, individuate, and inform with value the material and social objects that facilitate and form the institutions that both support and contour these practices.
Back tomorrow night, and he'll say more. Oh my God.
It's you.
Oh, how about you? Do you mind? Is that a bad thing?
No, it's good.
Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Tom. Thank you. And I'm reading from a play called The Tyranny of Structurelessness, and did a reading of it here at Howl a few months back, part of it. Anyway, I'm so excited to be in this book because as playwrights, we never get anthologized or published or anything. And this is towards kind of 3/4 of the way through the play, and it's a monologue, and he's trying to taper off his antidepressants for the second time. I'm tapering from my off-label high dosages of Effexor, and I go from 375 milligrams to 300 milligrams. I start to listen to the radio, and it is my sincere feeling that the radio, combined with the electromagnetic tear in my ass, in turn created a tear in the space-time continuum. We've all been transported to 1980, but I can't explain why. Maybe it's Y2K, maybe it's Zika, or the Montauk Project. A secret governmental experiment where the scientist believes nerves in the sphincters, when combined with extreme Tulsa coils, electromagnetic pulses, and radio transmissions, lead to a psychic binding and a tear in the space-time continuum for the subject and everyone within a 25-foot radius of the point of insertion into the anus. It happened. Lots of people missing from public parks, and this really did happen if you look it up. And now I'm at 150 milligrams of Effexor, thinking, like hours and hours a day, nonstop since Wednesday. I've just had this breakthrough, and I feel really happy right now, and I don't think it's an illusional breakthrough, but I'm gonna finish up all my projects that are computer-based. And then in March, I'm gonna quit my job, and I'm gonna work on totally, step-by-step disengaging from doing stuff with computers that I used to do in other ways, like writing with a pen on paper or reading a book, and I will work, but I am not going to work in front of a computer. So that's just going to be my compass, and stop listening to the radio on behalf of the electromagnetic tear in my sphincter. It's going to be an exploratory step-by-step process, kind of like a project. I think I'm going to do it. I want to tell you because I'm so excited, because I've just been going through agonizing. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I can't live this life anymore. Light change. I read this essay called The Tyranny of Structurelessness by Joe Freeman about how when feminist consciousness raising groups tried a non-hierarchical approach to organizing, an unspoken tyranny arose that was much worse than if they had just had some structure. 2 quotes from the essay. Contrary to what we would like to believe, there is no such thing as a structureless group. People would try to use the structurelessness groups out of a blind belief that no other means could possibly be anything but oppressive. Light change. And as a child, I wanted to be a slave, to be tied up. I once handcuffed myself to a desk at school and said, "Someone did this to me." And I wanted to be split up. Night has 100 eyes, more like 1,000,000, I think. So a rough time, spiraling out of control, back to shooting up meth and sex where men beat the shit out of me regularly, and I knew I had to get sober. Let's see, ecstasy, GHB, Special K, pot, Jack Daniels, Xanax, meth. I used to think I wasn't shooting up a lot, but then when I ran out, I'd go to the drawer and smoke the blood out of all the remaining needles, and there were a lot of needles. That's supposed to be a joke. I'm so glad people laughed. No one ever laughs at that. The first thing that happened was that someone organized an orgy in my apartment while I was coming in and out of consciousness. So I don't remember anything, but I was physically active during part of it. And someone attending the orgy brought luggage with him. And it turned out this luggage was all of his belongings. So when the orgy was over, he was moved in. He told me he was from Iran, but then I met someone later who said he's just a regular guy from Michigan. And he carried a book in his bag, History of America, and I only ever saw him eat an avocado and M&Ms. The day he moved in, my birthday, nobody from my real life remembered, but he knew. We sat on a bare mattress, stained, the orgy over. He took me in his arms, and eating an M&M, his tooth fell out. Later, when I realized he was reaching the limit of squatters' rights, I told him if he wanted to stay with me, we both had to get sober. He pretended to love my dogs, like, don't kick me out, I can't live without your dogs. So I left out some drugs I knew he couldn't resist, and when he did them, I asked him to move, which was kind of a dick move on my part. But he wouldn't go, he wouldn't budge. He'd leave for orgies, he was also hooking, I don't know, but he left bags and bags of stuff, multiplying. When asked to leave, he'd cry. And we all know a crying queen is a scheming queen. I still didn't know his name, and this part about the name seemed insane, that in this part of my life I was dispatching with the triviality of names. He went to a sex party, and while there I called, I'm getting in a car and bringing all your stuff. If you don't come meet me, I'm gonna leave your shit on the street. We met at the Dunkin' Donuts on 8th Avenue and 24th Street. His home away from home. Wi-Fi, bathroom to shoot up in. I showed him his stuff in the trunk, gave him $200, and then paid the driver. He cried for the dogs, and then I never heard from him again. As soon as I was rid of him, I knew I loved him. Wanted him back. We were meant to be together. God had brought us together. Suddenly it all switched and I was besotted, forlorn, wanted to switch places with him, Freaky Friday, leave my body, go into his, the pain of detox that I experienced for him once and then again later for me, 2 detoxes. But in the end, I could only fix myself. Was sick a long time. Walking down 7th Avenue, 6 months later, I ran into him, a potbelly, stumbling, carrying a folding plastic table lamp for reading, limp, drooped over, a dying plant. And around the bottom, a brown plastic bag, yellow ties leaked off like liquid. He didn't recognize me. For completism, I wanted to walk up to him and ask his name. I saw him take a picture of the sunset with a flash. And I remember the orgy where I wasn't the star, even though it was in my apartment. Just give him too much, so he'll pass out in the corner. I imagine he lives somewhere in the Southwest, where the crystal meth is cheap and the living's easy. A ranch, but he has internet. One of those video chat rooms where people shoot up in unison, a quantum physics event all over the world. Or he's probably dead. And the next two lines are crossed out, but I'm going to read them. I wonder if when people kill themselves, they don't leave as quickly. They circle around a bit. It's funny when you feel as if you don't want anything more in your life except to sleep or else to lie without moving. That's when you can hear time sliding past. Thank you.
Hey. Yeah, it's true. I'm shorter than you. So not to refer to my own oeuvre, but in my book, Chelsea Girls, the title totally comes from the fact that I worked for the poet James Schuyler in the Chelsea Hotel. And so, but and it was one of those totally lucky breaks in your existence. He was my favorite poet in the world. And yet I was told I would never meet him. I never could meet him. And then, weirdly, I was given a job where I was his assistant, and I kind of live with him 7 days a week in the Chelsea Hotel. So I want to read one of Jimmy's poems, which is in here. And I think it had just come out in a book that he, published at that moment. Here we go. It's called This Dark Apartment. Coming from the deli a block away, I saw the UN building shine. And all the months and years I've lived in this apartment, I took you so you and I would have a place to meet. I never noticed that it was in my view. I remember very well the morning I walked in and found you in bed with X. He dressed and left. You dressed too. I said, stay 5 minutes. You did. You said, that's the way it is. It was not much of a surprise. Then X got on speed and ripped off an antique chest and an air conditioner, etc. After he was gone and you had changed the Seagull lock, I asked you on the phone, can't you be content with your wife and me? I'm not built that way, you said. No surprise. Now, without saying why, you've let me go. You don't return my calls. He used to call me almost every evening when I lived in the country. Hasn't he told you why? No, and I doubt he ever will. Goodbye. It's mysterious and frustrating. How I wish you would come back. I could tell you how when I lived on East 49th, first with Frank and then with John, we had a lovely view of the UN building and the Beekman Towers. They were not my lovers, though. You were. You said so. It's Moyra Davey.
Maybe just up a little bit, tiny bit. That's good. That's perfect. This piece is called Wedding Loop, and I wrote it to accompany a large suite of portrait photographs that I made for an exhibition in Athens. All right. On a guided tour of a colonial cemetery in Kolkata, I stumble upon the grave of A. Thomas Prinsep and immediately remember this name's connection to 19th century photographer Julia Margaret Cameron. Related to her by marriage, the Princeps would figure amongst Cameron's favorite models, in particular Julia Prinsep Jackson, who was Cameron's niece and the future mother of Virginia Woolf. It's been years since I've looked at Cameron's portraits, the Victorian men, women, and children who sat for her in her converted chicken coop studio, her glass house on the Isle of Wight. But at the end of her life, ill and impoverished, she had little choice but to return to this hot, humid subcontinent of her birth, where she settled on her husband's coffee plantation and continued with the same unwieldy view camera to make portraits. By then, she had given up on the commercial potential of her portfolios. She focused instead on what was at hand. I photographed Jane in her wedding dress in the backyard, and Claire in her t-shirt dress posing with Emma in front of the white brick wall. Addie, to my surprise, joins the group and allows me to take her picture. Jane, unwisely, has been at the hair and makeup party since morning. She is beginning to unravel. My mother's sense of foreboding in the build-up to the event was not misplaced. Her house is packed with visitors and dogs. Addie is more sauvage than ever. Annie is boycotting because Claire is attending. Kate implodes at the last minute and refuses to get into a cab that will take us to the celebration in the suburbs. The demand to be public and social over an afternoon and an evening at a ceremony and a dinner with 150 people, most of them drinking, is too much for this group of women, my sisters, and their daughters, who are worn out physically and emotionally, are reticent by nature, and are trying to abstain. Caitlin and her spouse, Antoine, give vows that are funny and original. They're straight shooters, not a single cliche is spoken. Addie dances. She is a beautiful girl and a beautiful dancer, but when she's not on the dance floor, she sits by herself and stares into space. I'm sure the pictures I've taken earlier are mediocre. The light was flat, my subjects were posed. I have no business hauling out this difficult-to-focus camera and trying to revisit something I did also only passably well 35 years ago. Antoine and Caitlin take to the stage to greet and thank their guests. Then Caitlin, with difficulty, begins to talk about her sister, Hannah. Many people in the room are weeping, including Caitlin and her half-brother, Luca, age 15, with his forehead on the table. Jane tries to console him, but is too far gone to not make things worse, and Luca's parents intervene. The next day, Claire is cooking dinner for all of us and can't stop talking about the dozen or so nonfiction books she's reading. I'm trying to decide what to do about Jane's pills. She can't remember what she said to Luca the night before, though, in my opinion, it has more to do with the uncomplicated quality of a 15-year-old boy's outpouring of grief over the death of his half-sister, and Jane's claim that she can't cry or properly mourn. We managed to remove liquor bottles stashed in her purse and from under her pillow. She either doesn't notice or pretends not to. She also willingly gives me her pills. My mother's house smells permanently of animals and is fraying at the edges. I wipe dust off the leaves of the rubber plant in the hallway, acquired in 1966, the year my youngest sister was born. I bathe in the English-style tub, a solid comfort with elaborate chromed faucets that creak. In her essay, The Iliad, or the Poem of Force, Simone Weil cites the passage about Hector's wife preparing a hot bath in anticipation of his return from battle. But what Andromache does not know is that Hector's already been slain. She wrote, already he lay far from hot baths. Far from hot baths he was indeed, poor man, and not he alone. Nearly all the Iliad takes place far from hot baths. Nearly all of human life then and now takes place far from hot baths. My sisters all live on the edge to one degree or another in a cold climate city. With age, they anticipate winter with increasing dread. It is especially hard on Kate, who walks dogs for a living. In a dark, agitated mood, she said, "I can't bear the idea of another winter." Far from hot baths, far from toilets, I could add, Kate, who has been self-destructive and caring of others in equal measure her whole life, once told me she'd helped homeless people clean shit off themselves. In a very untutored way that grows out of 12-step immersion, she is living a life philosophically close to Simone Weil's idea that, quote, "we participate in the creation of the world by decreating ourselves," unquote. In a different notebook, I wrote, "Meanwhile, I was getting more and more depressed about my pictures, old feelings of fraudery and worthlessness. Mixed up with this are moods of sadness for my derelict family in the midst of all the apparent robust mental health and wedding happiness, though of course much of this is illusory. When I write, I almost always short myself, barely meet the word count. I listen to late Tolstoy read the fat books of Ferrante Knausgaard and Hervé Guibert's diaries and fantasize they're simultaneously writing and living their lives. They're long-take writers. They circle back over the material again and again, each time refracted through a slightly altered prism. There is comfort in their repetition. These last three, and perhaps Tolstoy as well, are writing about their very complex lives, some further complicated by having children. It's a rather curious effect to be reading these reams of words that burrow into lives termite fashion and find that the writing life is not often discussed, so that when it is talked about, the effect can be electric. These breaks in the stories to talk about the writing itself are thrilling and almost always incite me to grab pen or laptop so that I can record passages such as this one from Ferrante. Quote, "Perhaps Leela was right. My book was really bad, and this was because it was well organized, written with obsessive care, because I hadn't been able to imitate the disjointed, unaesthetic, illogical, shapeless banality of things. I should write the way she speaks, leave abysses, construct bridges, and not finish them, force the reader to establish the flow," unquote. Eric, Euripides, and Leo come to my studio. I struggle massively with the 4x5 camera. My light meter's broken, clouds block the sun just as I'm about to release the shutter. I flail around like an amateur and shout at J&B to help me. But I stick with it. I push through my awkwardness and ineptitude, endure my small panic despite my conviction that the pictures will be failures. I referred to this urge elsewhere as the pursuit of the opposite of low-hanging fruit, meaning pushing myself to do the thing that is not easy, scares me even. I put in a day's work and sleep, the sleep of the just. The portraits I take at the wedding and later in the studio are mostly of my son and his generation, inspired by Julia Margaret Cameron. Thank you.
I just feel like Eileen has done this really beautiful, generous act by kind of including a lot of us authors and the culture at large in this sort of pathetic moment. It feels really right to me, and we're really glad you're here. And I'm going to introduce Eileen in a moment. But to start with, I wanted to read one of my favorite poems in the book. It's hard to say which is my favorite. It's the first poem in the book. It's very, very short. It's by Alice Notley. All my life, since I was 10, I've been waiting to be in this hell here with you, all I've ever wanted and still do. And please join me in welcoming Eileen.
Thank you, Tom. And you guys are so awesome that you came tonight. It's so great. I just sort of woke, it's so weird. I woke up this morning thinking about my family. And I was like the middle of 3. And somehow we were all like a family of loners and weirdos and queers, really. And yet I was sort of dubbed to be the normal one. And so that was the requirement in my family, was that I must go out and be normal for the rest of the family. And it's like, they had no idea what I did when I went out. But it was somehow the performance of going out was basically my gig in childhood. And I feel like this room is somehow an extension of that, you know? Like last night, somebody who had a really good time said that she felt like this is what she came to New York for. And I think it was like, yeah, to be in a room full of really weird people, you know, who enjoy that kind of work, you know? And so I do think that's the heart of the Pathetic Project, which is kind of a very lopsided sort of belonging, you know? And I don't know, I guess I will I read something from the book? I feel like I have more to say about this sense of normalcy, but it's somehow deep in these pages, I think. Oh, I know. You know what? No. Okay. So here's where I'm going. So what that going out has been to me is always moving towards this kind of collectivity. You know, like being alone in different crowds. Like my brother and sister had best friends. They were always like one-on-one people, but I was always like in a gang. You know, and so defining and redefining and being welcome in many gangs and always trying to find the middle. And no gang really has a middle. So really being on the edge, like always being too quiet for the weird group and too weird for the. So then you would find another group. And so I think this is what I did during the pandemic, which was assembling this book. But I feel like I've been doing shit like this for years. And because my friend Joe Westmoreland is sitting here, I want to share my piece in the book, which is I guess the piece will explain it. And so I will just simply read it. But Joe was my campaign secretary in 1991. Because I'm not going to ruin my own piece. My piece will explain itself. Okay, so this is a campaign letter for President of the United States, 1991. Dear citizen, and it's dated September 11th, 1991. Today, I am announcing my candidacy for the office of President of the United States of America. I've actually been on the campaign trail since last April, when I made my first public announcement in New York City, and since then in a variety of places, including Chicago, New Hampshire, Vermont, Colorado, New Mexico, and now New Hampshire again. I don't know why New Hampshire again. Somehow. I don't think I was in New Hampshire when I wrote this, but. The initial impulse to run for office was spurred on by George Bush's speech at a college graduation at Ann Arbor, Michigan last spring. He stated that the politically correct are the greatest threat to freedom of speech in America today. By that he meant members of ACT UP, victims of bias crimes, women, homosexuals, ethnic and racial minorities. He would like them to shut up. As president, he functions as a grand employer who has a complaint box. Each of us may get our 2 cents in once. After that, we're on our own, because there is no special treatment for the vast majority of Americans today. There is very special treatment for white upper class, middle class heterosexual men, and for their spouses and children. There is very special treatment for fundamentalist Christians and fetuses. George Bush does not write his own speeches. The statements he made in Ann Arbor flowed from the pen of a new speechwriter, an alumni of the left-baiting Washington Times. The New York Times, which covered the Ann Arbor event, suggested that this was the beginning of the '92 campaign trail, for which freedom of speech would be a big issue. I thought, if he's starting now, I will too. I am a 41-year-old American, a female, a lesbian from a working-class background, a poet, performer, and writer, making my living pretty exclusively from these activities. I am a taxpayer. I've lived the majority of my adult life under the poverty level without health care. I have never made over $20,000 a year, which when I read this the other night, I was like, could that be possible? And I thought, what about my family? And my dad died in 1961, and he was a postal worker. So I looked up what postal workers got in 1961, and all I could find was that in 1971, they made $11,000 a year, which seemed completely insane. And then I thought, well, my mother was a secretary, my brother had a paper route, I babysat. We did not make $20,000 a year. That's crazy. Nor have I lived in a household where our combined incomes approach that amount. More Americans, far more Americans, are like me than George Bush. Why is he running this country in our lives? My campaign is about freedom of speech, mine and yours. I am not a professional politician, not a CEO or a lawyer. I write all my own speeches. I believe in total disclosure. What you see is what you get. I'm turning all of my upcoming art events, readings, and performances until Election Day into political events. I regard my campaign as a gesture of activism, an opportunity for me to vote. I will be a write-in candidate in as many states as I can file my papers in by next fall. I need your help in this area. I've got contact people only in the states I've mentioned here. This is the first monthly letter on my campaign trail. I mean, the thing was, this was like pre-internet too, so it was just sort of like I decided that I would make my campaign be, anytime anybody asked me to do anything in public, I would run for office. And that meant like being at a memorial, which was kind of obnoxious, but I would do it. And then I realized that all I was doing was running for office. All I was doing was announcing, because endlessly I thought any room I walked in, most of the people didn't know I was running for president. And so I thought, well, how do you get over that? And because I was like a poet, I had a mailing list of about 400 pieces. And so that's what you could do in 1991. So this is the first monthly letter on my, because I thought, get it over with, write a letter to everybody you know and let them know you're running for president. This is the first monthly letter on my campaign, and I'll be sending it to all of you who are on my mailing list. Feel free to publish it. If you would like to Xerox it and send it to 10 or 20 other people, please let me know, and I will send you a portion of the mailing list. I'm also enclosing a flyer each month, which you should feel free to reproduce or distribute as you see fit. I have no campaign fund. Actually, the thing was really cool. I raised $5,000 and I spent $5,000, so like I broke even as a presidential candidate. If you would like to be on the mailing list, it's free, though the price of 14 mailings, 29 cents plus Xerox plus envelope, it equals approximately $7. It would be helpful. I also have campaign buttons, $1. But mainly, I want to run, I want your vote, and I'd like to win. Sincerely, Eileen Myles. Thank you. So, thank you. And awesomely, Joe Westmoreland offered to be my campaign secretary, which was what really got me over the top. And so now we're just going to go on with the show, and I think we're beginning with the amazing Laura Henriksen.
Thank you so much, Eileen. All I ever want to do is vote for you. That was amazing, and thank you so much, Tom. It's been so fun getting ready for this event with you, and thank you so much, Jane. It's really such an honor to get to be here, and I feel so deeply moved and so deeply grateful to be part of this lopsided belonging made possible by this book. In case I don't notice, I asked someone to tell me when it's over. I thought you said, look out for blood, but that can't be it. Up late, cursing my name, my birth, my frozen above ground. Like a moth to a porch lamp, I say, sucking on its ice. Don't I feel dumb when I realize the place I thought was permeated with your memory you'd never actually been? It wasn't even your umbrella. Maybe I'm getting too comfortable being trapped in tunnels underground, but I know the truth, that all this calm is pretense, attending to its simmer. To want to, lying about your longing. What will you do that you do for you? Is there a word for the desire to bury myself in cool, damp dirt? For the desire to be suspended as in water, but in air? A word for the desire to revisit the traces of skin and grime I leave behind on every surface I touch, not to reclaim them or anything, just to see how they're doing. I don't want them anymore. Thank you so much.
Our next artist is Jack Halberstam, and I do have one seat here. I know we were holding a seat for someone. Have they arrived? Do we want to try to keep them right here? Or does someone need to sit? We have one seat. The seat is back. We have an empty seat here. Okay, never mind. So please join me in welcoming Jack.
Wow, that came quicker than I expected. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you all for being here. I've been feeling very pathetic recently, buffeted by various seasonal ailments. I wasn't sure I was going to make it, but here I am. And the piece that Eileen extracted from me for this marvelous volume is a kind of parody piece. So I hope people still kind of remember Carl Ove Knausgaard. Anyone? Yes, thank you, a few. So for whatever reason, 5 or 6 years ago, I read the 6 volumes of My Struggle and was sort of drawn in at various moments and fascinated and horrified at the same time. And even as I was reading, I'm like, why am I reading this, right? And I realized at a certain point that I wanted to understand how patriarchy is experienced by a white guy who doesn't really even get that he is the subject of this massive system. And so it became, super interesting to me. And so after finishing volume 6 and being horrified by its various meditations on Hitler and the Holocaust and so on, I decided I was going to imagine what a little piece of volume 7 would look like. So this is Carl Ove Knausgaard, My Struggle, reinterpreted by yours truly. All right. So as I lit my first cigarette of the day, I remember the text message that had been pinged in earlier and picked up my phone. It was my editor from England. Check your email, the message said. Who was trying to sue me now, I wondered. The very young girls with budding, fantastic breasts whom I had ogled in my first teaching job. My brother, his wife, my former wife, all of these people sue him over the course of the 6 volumes. The woman with small breasts who claimed I had raped her. My classmates from college, especially that woman writer I had written harshly about. Or maybe it was my best friend, Gear, angered, perhaps, by my constant concerns about us being taken for homosexuals while hanging out together. Oh God, no, not that. Maybe he actually was a homosexual and was truly offended. Or maybe his son was a homosexual and he was now offended by what he had read in My Struggle, Book 6. This could be bad. This could be very, very bad if he charged me with homophobia, because then I would no longer stand in for every man, the universal subject, the person in the street through whom the complexity of the world flowed. Instead, I would be marked as a bigot, a prejudiced and biased person, a homophobe, or else people would conclude that my comment served to cover up an actual simmering homoerotic desire for other men. But it wasn't a lawsuit. It was just a mean-spirited review of the last 3 volumes of My Struggle written by some weird professor in New York. This person, and I say person because I honestly have no idea what gender they were, and this even after looking up pictures of them on Google, this person has written a horrific parody of me. As I began to read the review, I calmed down. It's obviously just some third-rate scholar trying to score points for an identitarian ideology that reeked of simplistic judgment and was devoid of literary insight. Thank God. Thank God I'm a white man, I thought. I don't have to engage in this tiresome jockeying for position that marks homosexuals and women. No, a white man can just sit down and write and write and write and write the whole world. The fact that this world also comprises mostly of other white men in no way invalidates this labor, this art, this craft, the sublimity of what we write. In fact, by building on each other and on the work that came before us, we bypass the petty squabbles of the others and just dig into the important stuff, like whether to eat cornflakes or muesli for breakfast, how best to appreciate pornography, and what to do about these crazy women who are always pursuing us. Now, given that I am, in fact, the second best living writer in the world, after Peter Hanke, I do not have to worry about pathetic transsexual scholars trying to score points by imitating my style. I texted back to my editor, told her all was fine, don't worry about this review, and then I texted my girlfriend, positioning my smartphone at crotch level, pulling down my pajama bottoms, and getting the angle right to give a bit of heft and length to my otherwise flaccid member. I snapped a dick pic, checked the photo quickly, and then hit send, smiling to myself, hoping that my girlfriend would reciprocate quickly with a picture of her fantastic breasts. Now, over the past few years, I have been engaged in a massive writing project in which I set out to create a detailed account of my life from my first shit in the woods, I kid you not, that's volume 1, to my first experience of premature ejaculation, volume 3. You can see the struggle. From my earliest memories of my mother to my earliest encounters with pornography, I dug deep into the vast archive of Western literature on these topics. Joyce, Proust, Musil, Hölderlin, Goethe, Celan, Mann, Homson. That wretched professor from New York who was writing a parody of me claimed that I only mentioned male writers. That's ridiculous. It's not a matter of whether the writer is male or female, but only whether they are great. Whether their prose rises to the level of classic, as mine does, whether they are able, as I am, to capture the minutiae of their lives and then elevate it to the level of the universal. If women cannot perform this simple rhetorical operation, I am not to blame. The satirist who calls himself a queer theorist suggested that when women write about minutiae, the work is deemed trivial, but when men do it, it's literary. Nonsense. The literary requires no alibi, and I will provide none. Now, as for this charge that I am just a normative white guy insisting on putting myself and my experiences at the center of the world, well, what can I say? I am far from normal. I have always been an outsider, a misfit, an odd and strange person living at the very edges of society. Look at me. I am tall, reasonably good looking. I have a wife and kids. I listen to talking heads. I drink beer, a lot of beer. I fall down drunk. I love and hate my father. I love and respect other men. I fear and desire women. I write. I play drums badly, I confess. I look after my children. What could be further from mainstream culture than this? Indeed, since I was a small boy shitting in the woods and recording the color of my shit, I have known myself to be different from others. I have been marked by traumas big and small, the ferocity of my father, the indignity of being called a faggot at school, the abuse of alcohol, my struggles with premature ejaculation. Indeed, when people ask, why did I call my books my struggle, I try to explain the hardship that losing my erection so quickly has caused me over the years. I have struggled and struggled to find in bed beautiful blonde women with fantastic breasts. But once in bed with the woman of my dreams, my desire, like my words, comes spilling out all at once before my partner has often even removed the top layer. The main event is over. At that point, I'm humiliated and embarrassed, and I have rushed these women to the door and asked them to walk home. That's a chapter in the book. That's several chapters in the book. My struggle has been real. I have tried to cure premature ejaculation by wanking, by thinking of Nordic literature. Tried remembering my own short stories in order to delay the inevitable, but no avail. The only way to stave off the implications of my short and quick sexual experiences is to create long, hard, huge sets of writings that offset sexual inadequacy with literary abundance. The minimalism of my desire with the maximalism of my inner life. Look, I want to say, I am big, I am Carl Ove, I am a writer, I can have sex for longer than 2 minutes. I remember the day that Gear, my best friend, told me that the title of my books, Mein Kampf, was not original. What? I said, flabbergasted, has someone else also written about premature ejaculation at length? In a way, he answered. Have you heard of a little man called Adolf Hitler? Vaguely, I had heard of him. He was the father of fascism and another man who struggled with his father, with his desire for women and with sex. There was a world of men out there, I realized, like me, men who loved and hated daddy, loved and ignored mommy, men who wanted to be great and famous. I resolved then to pull my books out of the weeds, out of the mundane recording of the everyday, and make them meaningful. I turned on my computer and I dropped a 400-page account of Hitler, fascism, and the Holocaust into the middle of my book about family. There, that should do it. A big story within a little story. The story of a son who becomes the Ubervater in the middle of a story about a father who dies and leaves a mess. If the title My Struggle was taken, though, I needed a new one. The Birth of a Nation had a nice ring to it. That may do it. I turned on my phone to text my editor and tell her about the new title, but there were 3 text messages there from Gear. I tapped on the first one and saw he'd sent me a photo. What was it? A turkey neck, a hairless mole, a large worm? Oh no, it's a dick pic, but why is he sending me a dick pic? I scrolled up the message thread. Oh my God, my dick pic went to him and not to my girlfriend. Now he was reciprocating and declaring his love for me. He was a homosexual. Maybe I am too? No, I can't be. I love women, sort of. I hate men, sort of. Or do I love men and hate women? All the writers I read and love are heterosexual too, aren't they? Proust, Mann, Shakespeare. Wait, the queer theorist had implied that these writers are all homosexual. This deviant had implied I was a homosexual in denial. But of the many shameful desires that churn inside me, homosexuality is not one. In the end, my orientation is not to man or woman, but to art. All right, I needed another title. In the end, I have taken this risk, the risk of writing down everything I think and do, and of examining life down to its most trivial detail. And I have done so because this is the only way to tell the truth of who I, Carl Ove, really am. My story, you see, has never been told. This is a story of a young boy struggling to make a mark in the world, and then a young man struggling not to have to work, and a husband struggling to get away from his wife and kids, and then a man struggling to be free. It's a story that we catch glimpses of only in Knut Hamsun's Hunger and in Ernst Junger's Storm of Steel, because they, like me, were young men who declined to bend their narratives to the whims of public opinion and the fluctuating orientations of popular politics. They, like me, dug deep into the psyche and found truth. They, like me, struggled with struggle, flirted with fascism, and desired a man in black with a Mein Kampf look, as a nameless female poet once wrote. Except, unlike this second-rate poet, I am the man in black. I have the Mein Kampf look. And like Knut Hamsun, I offer psychological complexity in order to capture, quote, the whisper of blood and the pleading of bone marrow. In the heart of many a good white man lies a swastika, contempt for women, fear of death, a desire to be God, and to conquer death. But we cannot conquer death, nor reconcile to it. And so the whole world must burn. But as I grow older, as death beckons to me, as impotence sets in, I realize death is not the problem, it's the solution. That was it. I had my title for book 7, The Final Solution. The publisher loved it, the work was over, the struggle is real.
And now Amma Birch.
Hello. Eileen. Thank you. All of you, I'm so glad to see you all. It's been a long time since I've done a reading with this many people, I think. I'm going to read 3 poems from the book, 2 other poets and myself. I'm going to start off with, "It doesn't matter how you fall into light," she said, by Aquila Oliver. Now approach holiness in memory. Wizard scatters leaves, the little things basking out the window, air adorned aches to be invented, vulgarize the living sentence, trampled daisies, a mine shake the long night, unplanted placenta, every failed insurrection in cotton fields. I am where the sun has gone, sugarcane and pathetic. Look, Ma, no hands. Bodies jump overboard, taste is addiction enough. When horny, think of sexuality and gods, less than 100 identified in LA County. A bell tinkles on an ice cream truck. I shouldn't be no ways tired. Tell me it's Saturday, reason to wear something new. It's all right, breathe their air, the urge to kiss. All this time I thought I should have done something else. Would You Wear My Eyes by Bob Kaufman. My body is a torn mattress, disheveled throbbing place for the comings and goings of loveless transients. The whole of me is an unfurnished room filled with dank breath, escaping in gas to nowhere before completely objective mirrors. I have shot myself with my eyes, but death refused my advances. I have walked on my walls each night through strange landscapes in my head. I have brushed my teeth with orange peel, iced with cold blood from the dripping faucets. My face is covered with maps of dead nations. My hair is littered with drying ragweed. Bitter raisins drip haphazardly from my nostrils, while schools of glowing minnows swim from my mouth. The nipples of my breast are sun-brown cockleburs. Long forgotten Indian tribes fight battles on my chest, unaware of the sunken ships rotting in my stomach. My legs are charred remains of burnt cypress trees. My feet are covered with moss from bayous flowing across my floor. I can't go out anymore. I shall sit on my ceiling. Would you wear my eyes? And my poem. Yesterday I was counting caterpillars with pun. We were reciting lines, boys don't cry. Are you a boy or a girl? Do caterpillars ever get asked such questions? Pun was interested in death and burial in New Orleans. I tried to explain it to her. Language can be so futile, the barrier of knowing and not knowing. Don't all butterflies look the same, yet male monarchs have spots? Do butterflies have second-line funerals? A parade of butterflies carrying their ancestors' spirit home as they travel from south to north. I wrote Eileen today. They are in Greece. I asked them if they have been to Lafcadia. I wondered if there is a marker on the spot that Sappho jumped from. I'm sure you've heard about Steve Cannon by now.
And now Morgan Vo.
Hello. Amma, that was great. I was just realizing that the last time I heard poetry in this room, I heard Would You Try on My Eyes for the first time. Thanks to Eileen for this book, and I'm going to read 4 poems. Some. Against a striated wall, each porchy, sticky color from a different place, a perceived meat. And the worst blind smack down claimed to lock with us of all reasons in our 4 puffy socks. Strewn over the sofa, perishing, I would never forget you. There must be a doorway out, I hoped, right through the dark problem. No, not alone. People like monsters. Is that true? People want to get squished or eaten whole, and not so secretly. People want a short distinction between life and death. Imagine the wholesomeness of crawling into a dark throat, being a sucker once on the street, then soaked in blood. You learn there, listen, last. The gargles leaping down your body, 30 seconds. You think out loud, I'm close, and no one's looking. Here's what destiny has to say in its God darkness. How to block life opening and throw it into organizing, a less life wanting, show life having open tubes of plant life, pumped over buildings, a long loaded binding, LED light trip falling, Oscar name finding, seared life mark landing. Your body is going to let go, and so to live, to walk down the street, eyelids gently suggesting, to reap through the turning, surrounding in myself a small scratching print. Great. A wave of the hand at a love of Raheem Norman outside, a shake in the light I slipped on. Him saying, you see me? Me saying, yeah, because I feel him with the moon divided. At a certain time, leaving the roads, like it's there, now closed, that I followed in, that exchanges me, parts of me with parts of Norm. Thank you.
And now Pati Hertling.
Hi, I'm not reading my own work. I'm here to represent the ghost of Robert Walser. And it goes. He goes for a walk. Why, he asks himself with a smile, why must it be he who has nothing to do, nothing to strike at, nothing to throw down? He feels the sap and the strength in his body, softly complaining. His entire soul thrills for bodily exertion. Between high ancient walls he climbs, down over those gray stone scenes and dark green ivy, passionately curls up to the castle hills. In all the windows up here, the evening light is aglow. Up on the edge of the rock face stands a delightful pavilion. He sits here and lets his soul fly, out down into the shining, holy, silent prospect. He would be surprised if he were to feel well now. Read a newspaper? How would that be? Conduct an idiotic, political, or generally useful debate with some respective official half-wit or other, yes? He's not unhappy. Secretly, he considers happy alone the man who's inconsolable, naturally and powerfully inconsolable. With him, the position is one small, faint shade worse. He is too sensitive to be happy, too haunted by all his irresolute, cautious, mistrusted feelings. He would like to scream aloud, to weep. God in heaven, what is wrong with me? And he rushes down the darkening hill. Night soothes him. Back in his room, he sits down, determined to work till frenzy comes at his writing table. The light of the lamp eliminates his image of his whereabouts and clears his brain as he writes now. On rainy days, it is terribly cold and void. The place shivers at him. The green shrubs whine and whimper and shed rain tears for some sun. Over the heads of the mountains drift monstrous, dirty clouds like great, impudent, murderous hens over foreheads. The countryside seems to want to creep away and hide from this evil weather, to shrivel up. The lake is leaden and bleak, the language of the waves unkind. The storm wind wailing like a weird admonition can find no issue, crashes from one scarp to the next. It is dark here and small. Everything is pressed tight right up against one's nose. One would like to seize a sledgehammer and beat a way out of it all. Get away there, get away. The sun shines again and it's Sunday. Bells are ringing. The people are leaving the hilltop church. The girls and women in tight black laced bodices with silver spangles. The men dressed simply and soberly. They carry prayer books in their hands, and their faces are peaceful, beautiful, as if all anxiety were vanished, all the furrows of worry and contention smoothed away, all trouble forgotten, all the bells, how they leap out of peals and waves of sound, how it glitters and glows with blue and bell tones over the whole Sunday sun-bathed little town. The people scatter. Kleist stands, fanned by strange feelings, on the church steps, and his eyes follow the movements of the people going down them. Many a farmer child he sees descending the steps like a born princess, majesty and liberty bred in the bone. He sees big muscles, handsome young men from the country. And what country? Not flatland, not young plainsmen, but lads who have erupted out of deep valleys, curiously caverned in the mountains, narrow often like the arm of a tall, somewhat monstrous man. They are the lads from the mountains where cornland and pasture fall steep into the crevices, where odorous hot grass grows in tiny flat patches, on the brinks of horrible ravines, where the houses are struck like specks on the meadows, when you stand far below on the broad country road and look right up to see if there can still be houses for people up there. Sundays Kleist likes, and market days also, when everything ripples and swarms with blue smocks and the costumes of the peasant women on the road and on the narrow main street. There is this narrow street by the pavement. The wares are stacked in stone walls and on flimsy stalls. Grocers announce their cheap treasures with beguiling country cries. And usually on such a market day, there shines the most brilliant, the hottest, the silliest sun. Kleist likes to be pushed hither and thither by the bright, bland throng of folk. Everywhere there is smell of cheese. In the better shops go to the serious and sometimes beautiful countrywomen cautiously to do their shopping. Many of the men have pipes in their mouths. Pigs, calves, and cows are hauled past. There's one man standing there and laughing, forcing his rosy piglet to walk by, beating it with a stick. It refuses, so he takes it under his arm and carries it onward. The smells of human bodies filter through their clothes. Out of the inns there pour the sound of carousel, dancing and eating, all this uproar, all the freedom of the sounds. Sometimes coaches cannot pass. The horses are completely hemmed in by trading and gossiping men, and the sun shines dazzling so exactly upon the objects, faces, cloths, baskets, and goods. Everything is moving, and the dazzle of sunlight must, of course, move nicely along with everything else. Kleist would like to pray. He finds no majestic music so beautiful, no soul so subtle as the music and soul of all his human activity. He would like to sit down on one of the steps which lead into the narrow street. He walks on, past women with skirts lifted high, past girls who carry baskets on their heads, calm, almost noble, like the Italian women carrying jugs he has seen in paintings, past shouting men and drunken men, past policemen, past schoolboys moving with their schoolboy purposes, past shadowy alcoves with smell cool, past ropes, sticks, foodstuffs, imitation jewelry, jaws, noses, hats, horses, wheels, blankets, woolen stockings, sausages, balls of butter, and slabs of cheese out of the tumult to a bridge over the Aare, where he stops and leans over the rail to look down into the deep blue water, flowing wonderfully away. Above him, the castle turrets glitter and glow like brownish liquid fire. This almost might be Italy. At times, on ordinary weekdays, the whole small town seems to him bewitched by sun and stillness. He stands motionless before the strange old town hall with the sharp-edged numerals of its date cut in the gleaming white wall. It's also irretrievable, like the form of a folk song for people have forgotten. Hardly alive? No, not alive at all. He mounts the enclosed wooden stair to the castle where the old earls lived. The wood gives off the odor of age and of vanished human destines. Up here, he sits on a broad, curved green bench to enjoy the view, but closes his eyes. It all looks so terrible, as if asleep, buried under dust, with the life gone out of it. The nearest thing lies as in a faraway veil like dreaming distance. Everything is sheathed in a hot cloud. Summer, but what sort of summer? I'm not alive, he cries out, and does not know where to turn with his eyes, hands, legs, and breath. A dream. Nothing there. I do not want dreams. In the end, he tells himself he lives too much alone. He shudders, compelled to admit how unfeeling is his relation to the world about him. Then come summer evenings. Kleist sits on the high churchyard wall. Everything is damp, yet also sultry. He opens his shirt to breathe freely. Below him lies the lake, as if it had been hurled down by the great hand of a god, incandescent with shades of yellow and red. Its whole incandescence seems to glow up of the water's depth. It's like a lake of fire. The Alps have come to life and dip with fabulous gestures their foreheads into the water. His swans down there circle his quiet island, and the crests of trees in dark, chanting, fragrant joy float over. Over what? Nothing, nothing. Kleist drinks it all in. To him, the whole dark, sparkling lake is the cluster of diamonds up on a vast, slumbering, unknown woman's body. The lime trees and the pine trees and the flowers give off their perfumes. There's a soft, scarcely perceptible sound down there. He can hear it, but he can also see it. That is something new. He wants the intangible, the incomprehensible. Down the lake, a boat is rocking. Kleist does not see it, but he sees the lanterns which guide it, swaying to and fro. There he sits, his face jutting forward as if he must be ready for the death leap into the image of that lovely depth. He wants to perish into the image. He wants ice alone, only to the bridge, only to be the single eye. No, something totally different. The air should be a bridge, and the whole image of the landscape, a chair, back to relax against sensuous, happy, tired. Night comes, but he does not relax but he does not want to go down. He throws himself on a grave that is hidden under bushes. Bats whiz around him. The pointed trees whisper as soft airs pass over them. The grass smells so delicious, blanketing the skeletons of buried men. He's so grievously happy, too happy, whence his suffocation, his aridity, his grief. So alone. Why cannot the dead emerge and talk half an hour with the lonely man? On a summer night, one ought really to have a woman to love. The thought of white lustrous breasts and lips hurls Kleist down the hills to the lakeside and to the water, fully dressed, laughing and weeping. Weeks pass. Kleist has destroyed one work, 2, 3 works. He wants the highest mastery. Good, good. What is that? Not sure. Tear it up, something new, wilder, more beautiful. He begins the Battle of Sempach in the center of the figure of Leopold of Austria, whose fate attracts him. Meanwhile, he remembers his Robert Guiscard. He wants him to be splendid. The good fortune to be a sensibly balanced man with simple feelings he sees burst into fragments, crash and rattle like boulders collapsing down the landslip of his life. He helps him nevertheless. Now he's resolute. He wants to abandon himself to the entire catastrophe of being a poet. The best thing is for me to be destroyed as quickly as possible. What he writes makes him grimace. His creation is Miss Carey. Toward autumn, he is taken ill. He's amazed at the gentleness which now comes over him. His sister travels to Thun to bring him home. There are deep furrows in his cheeks. His face has the expression and coloring of a man whose soul has been eaten away. His eyes are more lifeless than the eyebrows over them. His hair hangs clotted and thick, pointed hangs over his temples, which are contorted by all the thoughts which he imagines have dragged him into filthy pits and into hells. The verses that resound in his brain seem to him like the croakings of ravens. He would like to eradicate his memory. He would like to shed his life. But first, he wants to shatter the shells of life. His fury rages at the pitch of his agony, his scorn at the pitch of his misery. My dear, what is the matter? His sister embraces him. Nothing, nothing. That was the ultimate wrong, that he should have to say what was wrong with him. On the floor of his room lie his manuscripts, like children horribly forsaken by father and mother. He lays his hand in his sister's and is content to look at her long and in silence. Already it is the vacant glaze of a skull, and the girl shudders.
Nicole Wallace.
Ani Moju, Nicole Indigenacas, Makwan and Dodame, Kakabakang and Donjaba, Lenape Hoking and Danongom. Hi everyone, thanks for being here. Thank you so much, Eileen, for this book and for including my poem in it. And thank you also, Tom, for coordinating tonight. I'm really excited to share. I'm going to read one poem. It's called Nij. But for the sake of privacy, this circle, imagine the space is warm and was and is not. And I think of all the sounds small crystals make when pushed together. And I'm failing at being honest. And what, and what, and what? I see what threads lie bare, what things accumulate. I try and be honest, and I am not. Neen, geen, ginaween. I disrespect time because it has disrespected me, and I don't know much more than that. When you come back, this will all be gone, and what can you expect when or with? The sounds you make in the night, the ways in which you don't. And it's so far from here, it's so far. I just put the first thing on, but for the sake of. Thank you.
Felix Bernstein.
So I'm happy to be reading tonight one of my favorite poets, John Wiener's. There's 3 or 4 poems in here from the Hotel Wentley poems, which is from 1958, written when he was 25 years old. And I encourage everyone to look through it. A poem for record players. The scene changes. 5 hours later, and I come into a room where a clock ticks. I find a pillow to muffle the sounds I make. I am engaged in taking away from God his sound. The pigeons somewhere above me, the cough a man makes down the hall, the flap of wings below me, the squeak of sparrows in the alley, the scratches I itch on my scalp, the landing of birds under the bay window, out my window, all dull details I can only describe to you, but which are here, and I hear, and shall never give up again, shall carry with me over the streets of this seacoast city forever. Oh, clack your metal wings, God. You are mine now in the morning. I have you by the ears, in the exhaust pipes of 1,000 cars gunning their motors, turning over, all over town. A poem for early risers. I'm infused with the day. I'm out in it. Even though the day may destroy me, placating it, saving myself from the demons who sit in blue coats, carping at us across the tables. Oh, they go out the doors. I am done with them. I am done with faces I have seen before. For me now, the new, the unfurled tricks of the trade, the place of the heart where man is afraid to go. It is not doors. It is the ground of my soul where dinosaurs left their marks. Their tracks are upon me. They walk flat-footed, leave heavy heels and turn sour the green fields where I eat with ease. It is good to throw them up, good to have my stomach growl. After all, I am possessed by wild animals and long-haired men and women who gallop, breaking over my beloved places. Oh, pull down thy vanity, man, the old man told us under the tent. You are overrun with ants. Man lines up for his breakfast in the dawn, unaware of the jungle he has left behind in his sleep, where the fields flourished with cacti, cauliflower, all the uneatable foods that the morning man perishes if he remembered, and yet we must remember. The old forest, the wild screams in the backyard or cries in the bedroom. It is ours to nourish, the nature to nurture. Dark places where the woman holds hands us herself, handles an orange ball, throwing it up for spring, like the clot my grandfather vomited months before he died of cancer and spoke of later in terror. A poem for the old man. God love you, Dana, my lover, lost in the horde on this Friday night. 500 men are moving up and down from the bathroom to the bar. Remove this desire from the man I love, who has opened the savagery of the sea to me. See to it that his wants are filled on California Street. Bestow on him largesse that allows him peace in his loins. Leave him not to the moths. Make him out a lion, so that all who see him hero worship his thick chest as I did, moving my mouth over his back, bringing our hearts to heights I never hike over anymore. Let blonde hair burn on the back of his neck. Let no ache screw his face up in pain. His soul is so hooked, not heroin, rather, fix these 100 men as his lovers and lift him with the enormous bale of their desire. Thank you.
We're going to have a little video visitation from one of the people who is sort of a patron saint of the East Village and a lot of the stuff that we care about. Samuel Delany is in the book, but what couldn't come from Philly. So he made a video. He's in the book. He has that great book, Times Square Blue, Times Square Red. And so he's going to read a little bit of Times Square Red for us.
We return for the second section of my reading from Times Square Red. Section 2.1. Contact is the conversation that starts in the line at the grocery counter with the person behind you while the clerk is changing the paper roll in the cash register. It is the pleasantries exchanged with a neighbor who has brought their chair out to take air on the stoop. It is the discussion that begins with the person next to you at a bar. It can be the conversation that starts with any number of semi-official or service persons, mailmen, policemen, librarian, store clerk, or counter persons. As well, it can be two men watching each other masturbating together at adjacent urinals in a public john. An encounter that later may not become a conversation. Very importantly, contact is also the intercourse, physical and conversation, that blooms in and as quote, casual sex in public restrooms, sex movies, public bars, singles bars, and sex clubs, on street corners with heavy hustling traffic, and in the adjoining motels or the apartments of one or another participant, from which non-sexual friendships and or acquaintances lasting for decades or a lifetime may spring, not to mention the conversation of a John with a prostitute or hustler encountered at one or another street corner or in a bar, a relationship that, a decade later, has devolved into a smile and a nod, and even when, to quote Swinburne, "You have forgotten my kisses, and I have forgotten your name." Mostly, these contact encounters are merely pleasant chats, adding a voice to a face now and again encountered in the neighborhood. But I recall one such supermarket line conversation with a woman who turned out to have done graduate work on the Russian poet Zinaida Hippias, just when I happened to be teaching Dmitry Merezhkovsky's Christ and Antichrist trilogy in a graduate seminar at the University of Massachusetts. Merezhkovsky was Hippias's husband, and I was able to get some interesting and pertinent information about the couple's wanderings in the early years of the century. I have at least one straight male friend who on half a dozen occasions has gotten editorial jobs for women he first met and befriended while they were working as topless dancers in various strip clubs that put them on the fringe of the sex workers' service professions. My straight friend was Robert Morales, who was born in 1958, and who died very suddenly from colon cancer in 2013. He was a writer, and for several years, until his unexpected death, my literary executor and professional assistant. A young street hustler in the 42nd Street area, whom I knew but was not a client of, introduced me to a new client of his once. Let me change over the paper here. A new client of his once. A 26-year-old lapsed Jesuit priest, for whom I shortly secured a job at a paperback publishing house in much the same manner. Another supermarket line conversation was with a young man who was an aspiring director, looking for some science fiction stories to turn into brief teleplays. I was able to jot down for him a quick bibliography of young SF writers and short stories that he might pursue. Whether or not it came to anything, I have no way of knowing, but it was easy and fun. Still, another time, it was a young woman casting director who needed someone to play the small part of a fisherman in a film she was working on. She decided I would be perfect for it, and I found myself with a weekend acting job, which I should say, eventually say came to nothing because after I and 3 other guys whom she had corralled got out there, they decided they didn't have time to shoot the actual scene, but nevertheless it was an interesting experience. One Saturday morning in January '98, my vacuum cleaner shorted out, and an hour later I sat it on the street by the gate before the garbage cans for my building, after making a mental note to shop for a replacement that weekend. 40 minutes on, at my local copy center, I was getting a set of photocopies for an earlier draft of this very piece that I'm reading you now, when a broad-faced, gray-eyed Italian-American in his late 30s, wearing a shiny red and blue jacket, wandered in. "Anyone want a dry, wet vacuum cleaner? $10. My first suspicion was that he was really reselling the one I had just abandoned. My second was that the one he was selling didn't work. A look disproves the first. Plugging his machine into an outlet in the shop's baseboard for a minute disproved the second. So I went home once more with a vacuum cleaner. Contact. Contact encounters so dramatic are rare, but they're real. The more ordinary sorts of contact yield their payoff in moments of crisis. When there's a fire in your building, of the sort I mentioned above, it may be that the people who have been exchanging pleasantries with you for years who take you into their home for an hour, or a day, or even overnight. Contact includes the Good Samaritan at traffic accidents, the 2 women who picked me up and got me a cab when my cane gave way and I fell in the street, dislocating a finger. Or even the neighbor who, when you've forgotten your keys at the office and are locked out of your apartment, invites you in for coffee and lets you use her phone to call a locksmith. Or, as once happened to me in the mid-'60s, when my then neighborhood, the Lower East Side, was was at its most neighborly and under the influence of the counterculture. A London guest arrived on Wednesday when I was out of town and expecting him on Thursday. Someone living across the street who didn't know me at all saw a stranger with 2 suitcases on my apartment stoop, looking bewildered, invited him in to wait for me, then eventually put him up for the night, until I returned. A final example. My current lover of 8 years and I, that was 8 years in 1999, I first met when he was homeless and selling books from a blanket spread out on 72nd Street. Our 2 best friends for many years now are a male couple, one of whom I first met in an encounter perhaps a decade ago at the back of the now closed down Variety Photo Plays movie theater on 3rd Avenue, just below 14th Street. Outside my family, these are among the 2 most rewarding relationships I have. Both began as cross-class contacts in a public place. Visitors to New York might be surprised that such occurrences are central to my vision of the city at its healthiest. Lifetime residents won't be. Watching the metamorphosis of such vigil and concern into considered and helpful action is what gives one a faithful and loving attitude towards one's neighborhood, one's city, one's nation, the world.
And now Andrea Abi-Karam.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight, and Eileen for including my poem in the collection and for letting me borrow your book. I just want to take a pulse check. How many people have been to San Francisco Pride? Okay, not that many? Small, medium, lust. There's heavy and constant exhaustion, like widespread static. I lean into the physical, circadian shake and revolt, bruises dull and wide, thin pointed scratches that grow loud with sweat, in a layer of U-Haul dyke grime. Buried deep in my knee scrapes, glitter and dirt and cum dense under my nails, heavy and constant. When the cops kicked us out, we used their headlights as a stage. There's something powerful about sinking into yesterday's wounds and letting it all light up. My chest, a fucking canvas. Pay to stare up close and not through any panes of glass. Up close and impersonal like public sex is at a distance, just bodies unforming, jaw tight. Play, power, power, play, play, party. I almost missed my flight to go to that. Power, situation, power, switch. Cold, obsessive, all events are recorded. Cold, obsessive, all options are recorded. Cold, obsessive, in which bodies are mixed together against the purity of whiteness. Sort it all out later. When the cops kicked us out, we used their headlights as a stage where the queers of color whipped the white subs. Divisions and subdivisions and subspaces and low-lit basements, that's where we host meetings to avoid dangerous visibility, easy recognition, easy on the eye. Miss the blind spot, miss the heart spot, go back and apologize. Between knowing and remembering where the cuts came from, where the structure came from, where the walls came from, did you build them? Did we build them by accident between ourselves? Maybe I'm too hopeful and people really are that sinister. Hacking and hacking until it doesn't track, glitter in the wind. The problem is when you get arrested with an X on your ID card, where do they put you? Actually, the problem is prisons. What if instead of collecting separate, lonely individualities, we set them free to sink back into the collective, resist the present, approach impurity, the exhaustion that happens through containment? What are the ins? What are the outs? Send a drone to drop off a pair of bolt cutters. I'll tie you up to the chain link fence after hours. Dangerous mixtures, impurities rising, at once collided, at once real and imaginary, all at once. What if we just all at once tore down the cages? 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you, that was great. You know, I have an impulse to read a poem by somebody in the book, which is already the one of the most read poems in here. Eliza read it last night, but I want to read it now. It's Sophie Robinson's, where is it? It's called Total Lol. Raw, 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 raw. That is how a dog goes. That is how a dog goes. Boom in the night. That is how a dog slides sideways. That is how a dog lies down in the grass and loafers and dies like the bad, dead dog it really is inside its orgied guts. And this is how we do it, in, out, in, out. This is how we move inside the dog space. This is how we are inside the dog. I am the dog head with my head in the dog. You are the dog end with your end inside the dog. We are a pantomime dog, and this is how we do it. Left, right, that is how we walk. Like the sick dogs we are, that is how we fuck ourselves. Inside out, and our fur turns to mush. This is how we think of something to make us cry on purpose. This is how we be brave and glass over like a sad dog's eyes. This is how we eat our own shit and sing with a mouthful all night long. Rah, 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 rah. This is how we all know ourselves. This is how we hate each other. We should all be singing this together. This is how we all hate each other. This is how we sound when we speak each other's language, and how your pussy tastes on a hard day's night. I like to suffer. It's good for us and makes us wet with pride or raw with longing. pulling at the leash. I might die. I might lie down and die. You can dog me in the park. I won't let it lie. I'd screw you 5,000 times and still be happy in my mummy skin, in my daggy dog skin, in my fox fur mangy woof woof jacket. My skin is my life jacket. My skin has a hole in it. My hole is round in red. My hole is my dog's head. I will die forever. In my sick dog head, I will loll forever. In my total bowl of meat, I will loll with my hole wide open. I will loll all night to the tune of my howl. Oh, I will place you in my snout and sing you all over. I will raw myself up all and down inside you, lover, forever. Thank you. Wow. Sophie Robinson. Video, Jillian Weise, Cyborg.
My name is the Cyborg, Jillian Weise. My pronouns are Psy, size, self. My name is the Cyborg, Jillian Weise. My pronouns are Psy, size, self. I no longer accept gender and disability as separate from each other. So the Psy pronoun brings them together. I'm a white cyborg. I am wearing rhinestones in my hair on the crown of my head because I really love the never-ending story for the girl who screams out, "Sebastian, Sebastian." And I was in hospitals a lot when that movie was in my life. I'm also wearing a netted rhinestone necklace, a tank top, a pleated bracelet or cuff, and Velcro on my face. I think that Velcro is makeup. I'm in my apartment in Tallahassee, Florida, and I am in pain. You can't see it, but I can feel it. Catullus tells me not to write the rant against Maggie Smith's Good Bones. You don't like the poem, so what? Why are you clicking on her, following her? I know. The metaphor sucks. So let's get drunk, score some poppers, act like horses. Call up Alec. Who is he to deprive me of the local geraniums just because he owns a thrift store? I got thrift and I got stored in the libraries. I am checked out. That poem is boring. It's the same poem y'all been writing in your centuries. Someone gets sad, buys a house, has children, politics, and little birdies, throw some ableism in and publish it. Here's a poem for you. Ignatius had a beard and I fucked him.
Thank you, Cyborg. And now Tom Cole.
Now I get to adjust the mic for myself. The tallest position. Hi, I'm Tom, and thank you, Howl, for having us, and thanks everyone for coming. And I'm reading from a play, and I'm so honored to be in the book because playwrights don't usually get published or anthologized, so thank you. And I got to read a part of this play as part of Janie Heath's series here at Howl in the spring, and so I'm thrilled to be back here at Howl reading another part of the play that happens about 3/4 of the way through. And in this part of the play, the guy, he's trying to taper off his antidepressants for the second time. I'm tapering from my off-label high dosages of Effexor, and I go from 375 milligrams to 300 milligrams, and I start to listen to the radio. And it is my sincere feeling that the radio, combined with the electromagnetic tear in my ass, in turn created a tear in the space-time continuum. We've all been transported to 1980, but I can't explain why. Maybe it's Y2K, maybe it's Zika, maybe global warming, or the Montauk Project, a secret governmental experiment where the scientists believed nerves and the sphincters, when combined with extreme TELSA coils, electromagnetic pulses, and radio transmissions, led to a psychic binding and a tear in the space-time continuum for the subject and everyone within a 25-foot radius to the point of insertion into the anus. It happened. Lots of people missing from public parks, and I learned about this from Lori Weeks, who's also in the book. This really, you should Google this. And now I'm at 150 milligrams of Effexor. Thinking, you know, like hours and hours a day, nonstop since Wednesday. I feel I've just had this breakthrough. And I feel really happy right now. And I don't think it's an illusional breakthrough, but I'm going to finish up all my projects that are computer-based. And then in March, I'm going to quit my job. And I'm going to work on totally, you know, step by step, disengaging from doing stuff with computers that I used to do in other ways, like writing with a pen on paper or reading a book. And I will work. I will work. But I am not going to work in front of a computer. So that's just going to be my compass. And stop listening to the radio on behalf of the electromagnetic tear in my sphincter. It's going to be an exploratory step-by-step process, kind of like a project. I think I'm going to do it. I wanted to tell you because I'm so excited because I've just been going through agonizing. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I can't live this life anymore. Light change. I read this essay called The Tyranny of Structurelessness by Joe Freeman about how when feminist consciousness raising groups tried a non-hierarchical approach to organizing, an unspoken tyranny arose that was much worse than if they had just had some structure. 2 quotes from the essay. Contrary to what we would like to believe, there is no such thing as a structureless group. 2, people would try to use the structureless groups out of a blind belief that no other means could possibly be anything but oppressive. Light change. And as a child, I wanted to be a slave, to be tied up. I once handcuffed myself to a desk at school and said, "Someone did this to me." And I wanted to be split up. Night has 100 eyes, more like 1,000,000, I think. So a rough time, spiraling, out of control, back to shooting up meth and sex where men beat the shit out of me regularly, and I knew I had to get sober. Let's see, ecstasy, GHB, Special K, pot, Jack Daniels, Xanax, meth. I used to think I wasn't shooting up a lot, but then when I ran out, I'd go to the drawer and smoke the blood out of all the remaining needles. And there were a lot of needles. The first thing that happened was that someone organized an orgy in my apartment when I was coming in and out of consciousness. So I don't remember anything, but I was physically active during part of it. And someone attending the orgy brought luggage with him. Turned out the luggage, all his belongings. So when the orgy was over, he was moved in. He told me he was from Iran, but then I met someone later who said he's just a regular guy from Michigan. And he carried a book in his bag, History of America, and I only ever saw him eat an avocado and M&Ms. The day he moved in, my birthday, nobody from my real life remembered, but he knew. We sat on a bare mattress, stained, the orgy over. And he took me in his arms, and eating an M&M, his tooth fell out. Later, when I realized he was reaching the limit of squatters' rights, I told him if he wanted to stay with me, we both had to get sober. He pretended to love my dogs, like, don't kick me out, I can't live without your dogs. So I left out some drugs I knew he couldn't resist, and when he did them, I asked him to move, which was kind of a dick move on my part. But he would go, he wouldn't budge. He'd leave for orgies. He was also hooking, I don't know, but he left bags and bags of stuff multiplying. When asked to leave, he'd cry. And we all know a crying queen is a scheming queen. I still didn't know his name, and this part about the name seemed insane, that in this part of my life I was dispatching with the triviality of names. He went to a sex party, and while there I called, I'm getting in a car and bringing all your stuff. If you don't come meet me, I'm gonna leave all your shit on the street. We met at the Dunkin' Donuts on 8th Avenue and 24th Street, his home away from home, Wi-Fi, bathroom to shoot up in. I showed him his stuff in the trunk and gave him $200 and then paid the driver. He cried for the dogs, and then I never heard from him again. As soon as I was rid of him, I knew I loved him. Wanted him back. We were meant to be together. God had brought us together. Suddenly it all switched, and I was besotted, forlorn, wanted to switch places with him. Freaky Friday, leave my body, go into his. The pain of detox I'd experienced for him once, and then again later for me, 2 detoxes. But in the end, I could only fix myself. Was sick a long time. Walking down 7th Avenue 6 months later, I ran into him, a potbelly, stumbling, carrying a folding table lamp for reading, limp, drooped over, a dying plant. And around the bottom, a brown plastic bag. Yellow ties leaked off like liquid. He didn't recognize me. For completism, I wanted to walk up to him and ask him his name. I saw him try to take a picture of the sunset with a flash. And I remember the orgy where I wasn't the star, even though it was in my apartment. Just give him too much, so he'll pass out in the corner. I imagine he lives somewhere in the Southwest, where the crystal meth is cheap and the living's easy. A ranch, but he has internet. One of those video chat rooms where people shoot up in unison. A quantum physics event all over the world. Or he's probably dead. And the next 2 lines are crossed out, but I'm going to read them anyway. I wonder if when people kill themselves, they don't leave as quickly. They circle around a bit. It's funny when you feel as if you don't want anything more in your life except to sleep, or else to lie without moving. That's when you can hear time sliding past. Thank you.
Bruce Benderson.
Hello, everybody. This means it's almost over. I'm the last one. Isn't that wonderful? I'm glad. It just so happened that a couple of weeks ago, I had my own book come out. And since I hadn't even received Eileen's, I brought this one. It's 50 years of stories, starting with 1970, 61 stories. Half of them were unpublished. It's called Urban Gothic. And I'm going to quickly read you the very short first story, which is called The Ring. Of all the gangsters and hustlers, the crack smokers and dealers, I only made one friend during my entire 15 years in Old Times Square. It was a 16-year-old boy, a frail little hustler from a middle-class family who had fled a sadistic father and alcoholic mother in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, one of the most exclusive enclaves in the Midwest. Aside from the Johns, he was the only white besides me in the bar we frequented, and his appearance was so extraordinary, mostly because of his ultra-blonde hair, his enormous amber-colored eyes that looked yellow in the sunlight, his arms like matchsticks, and his pale and translucent skin that others, intimidated and overcome by his beauty, tried to ignore. He was so slender and so smooth-cheeked that he looked like a young girl before her breasts have developed, and in summer his tank tops revealed his shoulder blades, which seemed sculpted from meringue. He was, without a doubt, immensely popular with the Johns in this place, but he possessed a combination of coolness and placidity that insisted on respect or a sense of embarrassment and unease on their part. I myself felt not the slightest sexual desire for him. It would be more accurate to call what I felt an irresistible reverence for his beauty, which filled me with tenderness. It's true that I wanted to caress his thick masses of fluorescent curls or touch his whipped cream skin from which emerged his prominent skeleton, but I did not dare, and in a sense did not want to. After a period of 9 months, he'd become my best friend there, the only one to whom I could lend money with the certainty that he'd pay it back, and the only person to whom I confided the details of my life, career, and desires. In contrast, the other hustlers were almost like adversaries, whom I desired and whom I paid for pleasure, but in whom I couldn't trust. In the entire bar, there was only one other person with whom I developed a casual friendship. She fascinated me largely because of her image. It was a very small Vietnamese woman, a transsexual who operated a transgender brothel in Atlantic City. Once a month, she came to New York to see her boyfriend, a Puerto Rican hustler, and I would see them in the bar. My first encounter with the Vietnamese had left me fascinated by her rings, her black Issey Miyake fashions, her jet-beaded capes, her lustrous black hair, cut Louise Brooks style, and especially her eyes, which shone like onyx jewels and which were framed by eyebrows tweezed into immense, thin half circles. Like the blonde boy, she was a better conversationalist than most of the people in the bar. After some time, I'd find myself talking with her and the little blonde while the Vietnamese's boyfriend left to find drugs. The blonde boy and the Vietnamese were in the habit of talking to each other to some extent, but I had the impression I was the principal link between the two. Perhaps the most striking thing about these experiences was, again, the Vietnamese's eyes when she glanced at me from time to time while I was speaking with the blonde boy. Just the hint of an ironic smile would compress the corners of her lips, and her eyes said that she was aware of the wealth of friendship I felt for the blonde. But she never mentioned this observation, and my friendship with her always remained on the same level. I love rings. For several years, I'd been collecting them. I don't know why, but when I wear a ring that I like a lot, I feel as if I'm under the beneficent power of a protective star. It calms me and gives me the impression of possessing power. I have a friend who insists on putting the rings I buy, always secondhand, never new, in a solution of water and kosher salt. According to my friend, this rids these jewels of the, quote, bad vibrations imparted to them by their previous owners. But I didn't believe in these notions, and I always discovered good energies in my rings. One day I was alone in the bar with the blonde, and he admitted, and he admired a gold ring with a sapphire I was wearing. When he told me, I took off the ring and offered it to him. I suppose it was a flamboyant gesture, the sacrifice of one of my favorite rings. But as I've already explained, this boy had something that inspired respect, and perhaps even more than that. The boy accepted in his dignified and nearly silent way, and the invigorating effect that comes from the accomplishment of a truly generous act spread through me. 2 days later, when I saw him in the bar, he was wearing the ring. That winter, I left New York for 3 months for some literary projects. Old Times Square has a quality that you couldn't bring to mind when you weren't there. I could never completely recall its ambience. I suppose that was the reason I didn't think about the place much during my trip. But from time to time, I would find myself thinking of the boy and wondering how he was doing. One of the first things I did upon my return to New York was to visit my bar. I was a bit disappointed that the boy wasn't there that evening. The Vietnamese woman was, but I sensed a coldness coming from her, and her ironic smile was a bit more pronounced. I wasn't at all surprised. In that world, everything changed so quickly. Your usefulness for someone could evaporate in an instant. There were too many factors interfering with friendship. Who knew? Maybe she was dealing with HIV now, or handling a legal problem. However, I made the mistake of speaking to her even so. And during the conversation, I mentioned my friendship with the blonde boy and said I was disappointed that he wasn't there that evening. And to exhibit my high esteem for him, I explained how I had given him a very expensive ring. As the months passed and the boy's absence became normal, I began thinking of him less and less. I admit I nearly forgot about him completely. It wasn't until just about the month of May that I saw his little back in its yellow tank top not far from the entrance to Port Authority. The traffic was making too much noise for him to hear me, but I ran after him and touched his shoulder. The face I saw when he turned his head was covered with a torrent of shredded skin, scarred into thin ribbons of dead flesh, and one of his amber eyes was no longer an eye, but a pink and gray hole. We conversed politely while I made an effort not to look him in the face, and when he left, I was overcome by pity and an unexplainable sense of disgrace. So I shouted after him, "Give me your telephone number." He came back and scribbled it on a piece of torn paper. I ran to the bar for a double scotch, and when the bartender, a worn-out, hardened guy, noticed my face, he asked in an offhand way what was going on. "Have you seen the face of that little blonde boy who was always here last year?" I said, forgetting the folded-up scrap of paper and leaving it on the counter. "Oh, yeah," said the bartender. "His career as a hustler's over, I'd say." He offered a gruesome smile. "But what happened to him?" I asked. "Who did that?" The bartender lit my cigarette and pointed to the back of the bar with his chin. When I turned to look, I saw the Vietnamese. "But why?" I asked in shock. "Don't know," said the bartender. "Something about a ring. You do know, don't you, that pathetic little blonde was her great love?" I nodded weakly. "He even gave a pricey ring to that Oriental slut, and she roared all the time, showing off her jewels in this scummy bar. But like a lot of people, she forgot he was only a prostitute. When she discovered that the ring hadn't been bought for her, but that it came from one of the kid's admirers, she threw acid in his face." My cigarette went tumbling from my lips. With a filthy, wet rag, the bartender wiped up the crumpled scrap of paper and my cigarette and tossed them in the ashtray. Then, brusquely, he threw all of it into an enormous trash can. Thanks.
Kyle DeCoyan.
This is, oh, shit. It's a pathetic beginning. This is a short story by Kan Shui, Soap Bubbles in the Dirty Water. My mother has melted into a basin of soap bubbles. Nobody knows what happened. I would be called a beast, a contemptible, sinister murderer if anyone knew. Early this morning, she started calling from the kitchen. Her shouting caused fits of bursting pain in my temples. For the past year, she slept in the kitchen. In fact, the house does not lack space, but she never stopped complaining that her room was as cold as an ice house, her nose running and saliva dripping as soon as she started in. She called me an unfilial son torturing his old mother like this. The whole show could end with a loud wail. One day, God knows how, she found the old worn-out camp bed in the attic where nobody had been for years. Her face lit up with delight at finding this treasure. Immediately, she set up the bed opposite the gas range in the kitchen. "Mother, please don't. Be careful you don't gas yourself." "Good God, son," she patted my shoulder and said, "isn't that just what you've been hoping for? You dream of it every night. I understand very well. Just wait patiently. You might get your wish someday." My face flushed and I mumbled something meaningless. As if to demonstrate, she shut the windows in the kitchen noisily and propped the doors shut with a stick every night before going to bed. Strangely enough, she never got gassed. Sometimes when a headache attacked me at midnight, I would become suspicious that Mother might be dead from the gas. Throwing on a jacket, I would rush out. But the sow-like snoring I would hear even before reaching the kitchen told me she slept soundly. However, when she used to sleep in the bedroom, she would complain about a lizard stinging her. Half of her head would be numb. Then she would get up to ransack boxes and chests, and I would spend the whole night without sleep. Whenever I hinted cautiously about my suffering, she would fly into a rage, shouting, "What's this? Your faithful mother has to be deprived of even such a tiny distraction. Oh, my good heavens." Then howling and slobbering, she would shove her body against me. In the kitchen, I saw her poking her pasty little face from under the black quilt. Spitting filth from her teeth, she said, "Send the gift to Wang Chi-yu today. I bought it yesterday. It's in the closet." She smiled treacherously as if she had cooked up some plot and was waiting for me to eat it. Wang Chi-yu is an assistant section chief in my mother's workplace. He has a daughter, a 33-year-old spinster whose face is exactly like her father's with a tiny mole on one cheek. My mother adored him and took every chance to fawn over him. Unfortunately, the chief assumed grand airs, looking cold and indifferent, disliking her perhaps because of her age and ugly face. After failures on several social occasions, she had a brainstorm and found a good solution: to give me to him as a live-in son-in-law. I had been to the chief's house once. Of course, all his family knew the reason I was there. They murmured in each other's ears, laughing grimly. The section chief was picking his ears with a special little spoon. His earwax filled a whole watch box. The 33-year-old spinster was sitting beside a huge fireplace, snorting out a strange noise that resembled a collection of animals roaring in a cave. As soon as she opened her mouth, cold sweat soaked my body. "What damn business do you have here, huh? Scram, my piles are acting up." My mother is indeed an iron woman. She stayed there about a quarter of an hour, talking and laughing, not turning a hair. She took out a packet of dried bamboo shoots and said, "My little son presents this to the chief." Then she walked out the door, keeping her head high in the public gaze. In the following days, she couldn't resist boasting and hinting in a suggestive tone that she had a special relationship with the section chief. "I have sore feet, Mother." "What?" She jumped from the bed, breaking a web newly woven during the night. The spider clambered away somewhere into the bed. "Whenever I hear you calling me, I feel as if my feet were being sawed through to the bone, and my stomach gets upset. I might vomit at their house." "Stop that trick with me," she shouted, waving her arms. The two veins in her thin neck danced like fish. "I have expected this. You're simply running against me. You put the spittoon on the threshold so that I'd step in it and fall down. Good Lord, what's happening here? Pausing, she ordered me to bow my head low before her. She poked my head left and right, searching up and down, even jabbing the back of my head with her filth-blackened nails. Finally, she spit a mouthful of water in my face and declared, "Your scheme can never work." After that, she started drumming her chest and boxing her ears until she was out of breath. And just then, something happened. The instant she raised her hand to beat herself, she overturned a cup of tea she had left on the windowsill yesterday. The tea splashed in her face. She tried to dry it with her sleeves, but rubbing only produced white bubbles on her skin. And where she rubbed, the flesh became hollow. "Mother, why don't you have a bath?" "Let me prepare some water for you," I said, as if commanded by a ghost. After pouring boiling water into the wooden basin, I hid outside the door. I could hear Mother mixing in cold water and cursing me, saying I intended to burn her to death. Then she fell silent, taking off her clothes, perhaps. My face turned pale from nervousness, and I was shivering all over. I heard a stifled scream, as though somebody were calling for help before dawn. After that, everything was quiet. I jumped from the stairs. My clothes were soaking wet, my nails blue, my eyes bulging. After at least an hour, I forced open the kitchen door with a hammer and dashed inside. The room was empty. My mother's clothes were at the bedside along with a pair of slippers. I stared at the water in the wooden basin, a basin of black, dirty, soapy water, on top of which floated a row of shining soap bubbles, spreading the smell of rotten wood. I let myself sink down onto a small stool. I cried for her dirty, thin neck and her ulcerated feet watering all the year round. I didn't call the others until noon. So people came, swarmed in, their stomping feet breaking one of the floorboards. They looked left and right, observing my swollen eyes suspiciously. Finally, they came to the kitchen. One bent down to study the water in the basin and even broke a bubble with his finger. He was a short man with long hair who looked like a thief. She disappeared after her bath, I managed to speak up, something surging up from my stomach. The spider wove a new net on my head. The crowd grinned at one another. "The water is smelly," the long-haired short man said affectedly. "Maybe something has melted there? Just now I gave it a jab and felt I had jabbed the backbone of a woman." "You might have jabbed the thigh," the crowd replied excitedly. Opening their blood-red mouths, they burst into laughter. The tiles on the roof jumped, and the walls gave out pitiful crackling sounds. They flew out like a swarm of bees, dancing for joy, reveling in the short man's unexpected discovery. Some couldn't restrain themselves from pissing under the eaves. After they had left, I sat for a long time, keeping my head low. Some cold leftover rice was in the pot. I had 2 mouthfuls, which tasted of soap. San Mao, have you sent the gifts?" Mother's voice came from the bottom of the basin. The rows of soap bubbles seemed to stare at me in the ghastly light. I staggered out. It was pitch dark everywhere. Several street lamps shattered like thieves' eyes. San Mao, the shouting from the kitchen continued in a rising pitch as if getting angry. Suddenly, I felt an itching in my throat. After a forceful cough, my mouth gave out a bark, and then another and another. People encircled me as I jumped up and down, barking ferociously. I discovered a particularly disgusting old fellow who pushed here and there in the crowd with an idiotic smile on his face, his crotch all wet with urine. I charged and bit his shoulder. Tearing hard, I ripped off a piece of flesh. He crashed down, bleeding like a pile of firewood.
Our very last poet, Tom Carey.
It's bright up here. Hi. I'm reading a poem by Steve Carey, and I'm Steve Carey's brother. Can I get a little more light here, though? I'm practically Mr. DeMille. Thank you. There's a scene from Sunset. Hello, Hawkeye, from Sunset Boulevard. Goodbye forever, Steve Carey. Shit, I'm busting out of this mill. Yes, I am. Getting out of this burg, leaving, quitting this place, splitting, making my beat, making tracks, hauling out, heading out, hauling ass, heading elsewhere. Vacating the premises, bent on all points other. Vamoose I, picking them up, laying them down, following the sun, moving out, moving on, making for more clement climbs, hauling these bones out of here. Avanti, away me. Me, I'm fading. Fade me. Changing my whereabouts, my tune, relocating, taking it on the lam. Beating my feet, taking the path of least resistance, cashing in my chips, making a fresh start, cutting my losses, tending west, heading east, packing up my old kit bag, pulling up stakes, dragon, cutting loose, this kid's history. Watch my smoke. I'm breaking my contract. It's keeping on, emigrating, moving my cookies, changing the record, making haste, going on the run, read trucking for wistfully sprinting, shipping out, sailing with the tide, saddling up, mounting my nag, shimmering off, departing, dissembling, blowing this joint, disappear, making myself scarce, going off, remaining not, otherwise traipsing, trotting off, tripping off, shifting off, wandering off, oiling off, evacuating, vanishing, taking myself elsewhere, relocating, generally resettling, picking up the pieces, casting my fate to the wind, setting sail, setting out, setting off, turning my back on all that once was, burning through, breaking off, shuttling forward, shuffling off, cutting the cord, jumping bail, shifting my load, putting in for a transfer, taking it on the road, otherwise disposing of myself, replanting, jumping ship, emptying the coffers, closing all accounts, once since gone, one presently absent, aspiring to be no longer among those present, with us no more, literally vacuous, elsewhere represented, fervently without, desirous of other office, sprung, soon to be in frequent correspondence with those now present, keen maker of the heart go fonder, gone like a cool breeze, AWOL, becoming dim-pictured, no longer at this address, gone but not forgotten, author of this goodbye, poof, what I'll do is leave, though known, now vague, obscure, abstracted, a nameless haze, I'm packing it in, tossing my lot, casting off, cruising through, disporting anew, newly moved, the new hand, new kid on the block, prominent loss, Mr. Toodaloo, go bozo, I'll be shoving off, shifting gears, shagging out, taking off for parts unknown, in fact, taking off, flying the coop, taking care of the last few details. I'm the one winkled away on or about this day. I'm out of here, kicking up dust. Dearest, I wish you the best of everything and shall watch your future career with considerable interest. Off I go, ski-daddle, flying away, grabbing a cab, giving up my chair, gone globe-trotting, soon to present a letter of introduction, sending love to her and her people, presuming significant distance, doing a bolt, conspicuous in my absence, having a wonderful time, end of transmission, sayonara, adios, au revoir, aloha, so long.
That was a great way to end a wonderful night. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eileen.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank each one of you beautiful, crazy artists, writer, people who read, and every one of you who came tonight. You're all so great. Thank you, and I hope you have all the time to do every crazy thing you ever wanted to do, starting now. Later, again. Goodbye.
Thank you, Howl.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Howl. Love you. It's been so much fun.